Jim entered the bar with a clear feeling of awkwardness. He didn't want to be here at all, but he had driven himself into a trap. Principles are stupid things. They limit your actions no matter where you turn. If they can simply be ignored, then these are not principles at all. The bar was reasonably full despite the time being mid-afternoon. It's still early for evening customers and a little late for those who like to drink with lunch. Jim stopped at the counter, looking around the room. Ed had already poured him his usual drink by the time he arrived. "Hello. What brings you here so early?" Jim winced. "Not the most pleasant thing. I have a meeting." The bartender nodded in understanding. "It must be that nervous guy in booth 8. He nodded towards a man with ashen hair and broad shoulders. Yes, that was his bastard. Jim drained his glass with a sigh. "Ed, add me a shot of vodka here." The bartender raised an eyebrow. He usually drank strawberries and lime. "Believe me, I'll need it now." Shrugging, Ed filled his glass and Jim headed to the booth. For the first time in over a year, Jim found himself in the same room as Reg. They used to be friends in high school and after, but everything changed. Firstly, Reg started dating just about anyone, and it didn't bother him at all whether the girls were married or not. And secondly, his brother David's wife cheated on him, and it almost ruined his brother's life. David was still trying to get out of alcohol captivity, and his children began to have problems with their studies and behavior. From then on, Jim vowed to never be in the same room with his former school friend. Reg looked at him warily. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure I'd come either. So what's up?" Jim wasn't going to waste much time on this serial cheater, but Reg was practically begging for a meeting on the phone. "So should you ignore the request for help or trust your principles and avoid this bastard?" After a couple of hours of thinking and discussing with Sally, he finally decided to listen to him. As he sat down, Reg pulled out a pill and swallowed it. "Is he also hooked on pills?" Jim looked at him in surprise, but Reg, slightly embarrassed, explained. "I was in the hospital. Ribs still hurt." "Yes, I didn't hear." Reg winced. "Well, no wonder. I called Hank and Phil, my so-called best friends, while I was there. They laughed when they heard what happened." Lulled. Jim sighed. "Okay, tell me what happened." "I was in one of the clubs. There was a cool blonde. Well, not the most beautiful, but with some strange energy. She was dancing with a bunch of guys, and I got into her dance a couple of times. I roll up to her, and then some idiot comes up and tells me to get out. I mean, wait. Sorry. He said he would either punch me in the face or allow me to continue harassing her. It actually sounded stupid. It's like he's doing me a favor by offering to just hit me. With such an important air, you are an arrogant idiot." Jim restrained himself from making the obvious comparison. "Well, I got angry and decided to take revenge on him by taking up his offer. Like, since he's such an idiot and openly allows me to hit on his girlfriend, he has no idea what I'm capable of. So I continued to pester her, just to show him. I didn't come here to listen to you brag about beating someone's wife," Jim said wearily. "No, this is important to the story." She acted somewhat distantly, not exactly welcoming. Much less fire than the first time I danced with her. I was careful. She tried to get rid of me several times, but she never said no. And if she doesn't, that means she can, right? Well, I kissed her on the dance floor, thinking that her boyfriend was seeing it, and she just looked at me and said in such a strange voice that she knew a quiet and secluded place. Well, I think I'm lucky, and I take her to the closet, flirting to the fullest. Jim's face contorted in disgust. It sounded like just another boastful story from Reg, and he really didn't want to waste his time on it. But there was no usual self-confidence in his voice. On the contrary, there was confusion in his voice. "Jim," as soon as the door closed, she pulled out a gun. "I swear on everything that is sacred to me, she was going to kill me. And what is sacred for you?" And did she even explain why? I was focused on the trunk. "Fuck you." Wait. His gaze wandered to the past. She said that I was deliberately trying to destroy her relationship with her husband, and she would kill me before I achieved my goal. Her eyes, Jim, her damn eyes. It was as if she wasn't there. I was just a minor nuisance that needed to be dealt with before leaving the club. He shuddered, remembering her expression. So this asshole knew. He just knew where she was going to be and what she was going to do. Don't ask me how. And he walked in with this forensic kit and pulled out the tape and the silencer like it was just another day for them. My life didn't exist for them at all. I thought they were joking, but they sat there like the Addams family, discussing where to hide my body. Well, here you are. What happened? There was little sympathy in Jim's voice, but there was a slight curiosity. I think, I think they decided that killing me was too much trouble and not worth it. She said that if I let him beat me, they would turn a blind eye. His voice trembled. They made me ask for it. His eyes became lost again, and his face twitched as he remembered being beaten. Then they said that if I gave them even a little trouble, they would come back. They took my driver's license and social security card. They even cut the valves off the tires on my Mustang, he said indignantly. Bastard. Jim barely restrained himself from shouting it in his face. You are worse, much worse than I thought. What? I'm the victim here? Victim? You deliberately approached a married woman, and when you were asked not to interfere, you still tried to seduce her, just to ruin their relationship. So you were just unlucky that this time you met someone who could stop you. You could be dead. You should have been dead. You deliberately tried to ruin something that was very important to them, and now you want sympathy because you failed to pull it off. Jim sat back, wishing he'd ordered a double and feeling like he'd wasted his time. What do you want, Reg? Reg looked devastated. I want my friends back. I miss you. Even you. I was in the hospital for several days. I called the guys, and they just laughed. They didn't particularly like you sleeping with Wes' wife. Wes got divorced and moved away, you know? I know about the divorce. What about your friends? Girls? Reg shifted uncomfortably. Yes, after you all turned your back on me, I called a few of them. But I don't have some kind of queue of girls ready. Usually, it's kind of consistent. He looked even more depressed. My friends expressed some sympathy, but visit me in the hospital. It would be inappropriate, and they knew it. One or two said that they could call me when I felt better, but he did not continue. Have we turned our backs on you? After what you? Okay, it doesn't matter. Jim tried to suppress the feeling of indignation. Okay, poor choice of words. I meant that you left, and now, it's like I have no one left. Reg sighed heavily. I thought a lot about everything. What else could I do? I sat in my apartment for a week after that. What if they killed me? How many suspects would they have? How many people would raise a toast not to me, but to my killers? How many people would come to my funeral? Too much for the former and too little for the latter, Jim said. Yes, Reg's voice was empty, more like a sigh of agreement than a word. Jim's glass was also empty. He pushed away from the table and headed towards the counter. Give me a double, Ed. Is it that bad? I was waiting. Reg. He tries to sleep with anything that moves, and if it doesn't move, he kicks it first. And this applies to married women, especially married ones. He's right. Beautiful people get married early, but Reg has a keen eye. Suddenly he had an epiphany, and now he wants to fix everything. Or at least that's what he says. And you don't believe him. Not really. Why? Because his reason for seeking forgiveness is that he is currently uncomfortable and feels alone. And you think that a person cannot ask for forgiveness because of selfish reasons. Of course not. Then what should he have to do with it? What is the benefit of asking for forgiveness? Jim thought about it. It looks like he's really suffering. So you're telling me to just accept all this? Asked Jim. Ed wiped his glass, carefully looking at it in the light. Don't know. What are your religious and moral principles when someone asks for forgiveness? Jim put the glass down on the counter with all his might. It's a miracle it didn't crack. Damn it. He looked at the bartender as if he was ready to kill him with his gaze, but he was very focused on some spot on the outside of the glass. Through clenched teeth, Jim said, You, by the way, Sally said that your mojitos are mediocre and boring. Ed looked at him with offense. That's mean, Jim. And considering she's the only one ordering them, I'll take note. Does he really think an apology will be enough to make things right? Maybe. Perhaps he does not even understand what a difficult path lies ahead of him. He won't be able to fix everything right away, and it's unfair to expect this. But you can help him realize what he's done. If you need it. Ed finished casually. Damn you, Ed. Jim began to get angry again. Ed grinned. Calm down. If it helps, remember what Henry Roman II had to do to get a pardon for the murder of Thomas Becket. Rubbish and ashes. Walking barefoot in Canterbury. Spanking by monks. Repentance is not for the faint of heart. It's easier to stay bad. Who? Google it. Jim took his drink and walked back to the booth. He sighed as Reg watched him silently. So, have you seriously decided to change your life? He asked. Reg nodded. Certainly. I'm truly sorry, and I will do everything to make things right. You know, people easily say, I'll do everything. Well, you have to prove it. It's time for us to go. Where? Reg didn't like the feeling he got from Jim's determined look. Where are we going? We're going to my house for dinner, he said ominously. Honey, I think one of our neighbors is cheating on her husband. There's some kind of flashy Mustang standing in the yard. Sally began when she entered the house after working with a bag of groceries. She stopped when she saw them and slowly began to smile. Wow, Reginald Perry is at my house. How sweet. Her smile did not disappear, but her eyes became a little narrower when she looked at Jim. What do I owe for such an unexpected visit? Jim and Reg both cringed internally. Jim quickly took the lead. I invited him to dinner. For dinner? Today is a day of surprises. It's good that I just came from the store, otherwise I don't know what I would have cooked. She looked at the bottle in Reg's hands. I see you feel at home. Jim, honey, could you come with me to the bathroom? I noticed that something was leaking there. Slowly Jim trudged behind his wife, who was pushing him in the back. Reg felt extremely awkward. He was great at reading body language. The muffled hum of their conversation could be heard throughout the house. Suddenly he heard Sally's muffled exclamation. He said, "What?" They returned a few minutes later, Jim looking tired and determined, his arms crossed over his chest and Sally's eyes sparkling. There were no smiles. She sat down at the kitchen table opposite Reg and crossed her arms in front of her face, resting her elbows on the table. Well, every evil has its good. At least that's one less Christmas card I have to send this year, she said calmly. You never sent me a Christmas card, Reg said. I wasn't talking about you, she answered, looking at her husband. Did you tell Ed about his mojito? Jim nodded. Next time we visit him, remind me to discuss moral blackmail with him. I already remember, Jim agreed. Reg started to get up. Listen. Clear. This was a bad idea. Sorry for wasting your time and disturbing your cozy home. He tried to speak sarcastically, but he didn't really succeed. Sit, Sally barked. Reg sat up a little faster than he would have liked. There was a tone in her voice that was reminiscent of childhood, when belts rustled and wooden spoons clicked. Why did you decide to leave right now? She asked, no longer judging, but with curiosity. Because you're coming at me. Because you don't want to help me. Because I don't need to drag Jim into my problems either. Sally nodded slowly. One of three, not bad. Very small, but a step. Do I want to help you? No, not particularly. But we don't have much choice. The point of the principles is that sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do. Otherwise, it's just vague directions. I hope you like lasagna. While we prepare dinner, we'll figure out the rest. Reg hated lasagna. He smiled tightly. They decided to start from the very beginning from Reg's apartment. So that's what it is. This is your den of vice, Sally calmly noted. No, this is the living room of vice. An extra room would cost an extra $200 a month, Reg replied. Sally looked around with curiosity, trying to understand what Don Juan's apartment looked like. Surprisingly, everything here looked quite harmless. In the center, there was a leather sofa and armchair in a burgundy shade, and next to it were a cute coffee table and side tables in the Chippendale style. The carpet was clean. The light scent of sandalwood hung in the air, adding a special atmosphere. There was also an expensive entertainment center with a large plasma TV. Touching the chair, Sally noted that it was soft and cool to the touch, although in a short skirt she would not like to sit there for a long time, especially without clothes. Oh, there were blankets on the backs of the sofas for those who prefer warmth. The walls were decorated with cute paintings. The light was dim but cozy. Not a bad place, Jim remarked. He wasn't even going to think about letting Sally go to Reg's apartment alone. He trusted her, but he didn't want to put her in an awkward position, even if Reg was acting decent now. Sally did not object to his presence and would even have suggested it herself if he had not volunteered. It was her idea to come here. "Well, did I pass your inspection?" Reg asked a little sarcastically. "We weren't particularly interested in appearance. It's just a facade that you show to your girlfriends." Sally went to the nightstand. "By the way, it was done very well. Surely this sofa cost you a fortune, and the carpet. You just want to take off your shoes and sink your toes into its pile." According to the laws of sex, she headed to the kitchen, and Jim began to study the entertainment system. In a cabinet hidden in the entertainment center was a large DVD organizer, obscuring what was behind it. Behind him were the Xbox and PlayStation 3. "Why is your DVD organizer hiding your game consoles?" asked Jim. Reg gave him a charming smile. "Well, you know how superficially girls treat this. Once you start playing video games, they lose respect for you." "What does Zm mean?" "Reg, how much do you drink a week?" Sally intervened from the kitchen. There was a clink of empty bottles as she appeared with 3 of them in her hands. "I found this in the trash." His face was distorted by a painful grimace. "Everything is not what you think. I often sit without work, and—" He fell silent as she simply went back to the bathroom. A few minutes later, she returned and sat down at the kitchen table. Jim sat down next to her. She naturally and involuntarily took his hand. "Well, let's start with the basics. You are completely broken. Your diet is disgusting. I saw 3 different antidepressants in the bathroom. You drink too much, and nothing you do will fix your life," Sally said sternly. "Oh, that's all?" Reg raised an eyebrow. "Do you want help or not? How are you sleeping?" His eyes darted to the side, then down, and his mouth opened slightly, but he still didn't say anything. Finally, he looked up. "Badly. Very bad. That's what alcohol is for." Sally approached the next question carefully. "Jim said you were recently beaten." Yes. Did he tell you how it happened?" "He tells me everything," she answered calmly. "And how are you going to fix me?" She sighed. "If you're going to put words in quotation marks, it won't work. I don't like your tone. Think you already have all the answers? Then look for them yourself. We offer you the help you asked for. If you refuse it, it's your choice." Silence reigned in the kitchen. Finally, he said, "What should I do? It's simple. You need to completely trust me." Her smile did not promise anything good. "Can you trust a woman with such control over your life?" Her eyes looked at him searchingly. "Or will you continue to drink, suffer nightmares and sleepless nights?" "How did you find out about nightmares?" Jim said quietly. "It's written all over your face." After a long pause, Reg nodded briefly. "What?" Sally insisted. "Okay, whatever you say. I want my life back." She gently touched his cheek. "Do you really want your life back?" "I wouldn't want to. I would like something better." She suddenly stood up, ending the conversation. "Well, enough of that. I don't even want to see what's in your bedroom. Our children can still stay at home on their own, but it's too late. Tomorrow, I will select a group of people with addictions for you. I will also give you contacts of a psychologist who works with post-traumatic stress. If possible, we will find someone with traditional views." Jim led her to the door. "Wait, you never told me what was wrong with me," Reg shouted after her. She turned around. "This is a disease as old as time," and slammed the door. Jim got into the car next to his wife. "He hides his game consoles," Sally thought. "It's pretty sad," Sally muttered. that he feels he has to hide who he is just to get what he thinks he needs. Jim gave her a sly grin. Well, I love video games, so does that mean I can be myself and get a new console? Not in a million years, she shot back with a teasing smile. Video games are a waste when you have nothing better to do, and you, my dear, have a life. Are you really going to trade family picnics and evenings with your wife for pixels? Well, if you put it that way, Jim trailed off with a laugh. She leaned closer. You know, maybe I'll dig out some shorts and a tank top, and we can play Tomb Raider when the kids are out. He raised an eyebrow. Think I'll find any treasure? Guaranteed, she said, pressing her shoulder to his, her eyes sparkling. Later, as Sally drove through the quiet streets of Columbus, she glanced over at her passenger. So, how's your psychologist working out? She asked. Reg shifted uncomfortably. A little old-fashioned, maybe, he replied. Where exactly are we headed? Some people confuse political trends with human nature, Sally said, almost to herself. Reg felt a growing unease as they drove, recognizing more and more of the neighborhood. Every turn increased his anxiety and, strangely, his excitement. When they finally pulled into a quiet cul-de-sac, he began to sink down in his seat, his gaze darting around as if expecting to see someone familiar. Relax, Sally said, her tone firm. They sold the house last month. She moved out. He was long gone before that. She gestured toward a well-kept two-story home with tidy flower beds. Wes and Beth Moran's place. Nice, huh? Reg's eyes stayed fixed on the house, a frown settling in. So, who lives there now? He asked, his voice tense. Who knows? Maybe tenants. Maybe someone who just got lucky. And Beth, where did she go? Sally looked at him, her gaze lingering. She started the car and turned them around, passing through streets lined with quaint Midwestern homes. The silence stretched until Sally finally asked, And Wes? Who cares what hole he crawled into? Reg muttered irritably, sinking back in his seat. They drove in silence for a while, farmland gradually replacing the suburban landscape. Eventually, Sally spoke up, her tone probing. Just curious, when you and Beth got involved, who pursued who? What? Reg stammered, caught off guard. You heard me. Did you go after her, or did she come to you? Reg thought back, that familiar instinct to deny flaring up. No evidence, no admissions, always deny, always deflect. Only if caught red-handed would he even acknowledge knowing someone. In his eyes, this approach gave both sides an out, a way to move on. After a moment, he exhaled. I ran after her, he admitted quietly. Sally's fist hit the dashboard in frustration. Damn it, Reg, she has 2 kids. The houses grew sparser until they reached open fields and a rough country road. Sally finally stopped in front of a small, run-down house. A cracked gravel path led to a dilapidated shed, and a battered Ford Focus sat in the driveway. She turned off the car and looked at him. Reg's eyebrow arched in disbelief. This place? Really? It's not even fit for a dog. You don't have a dog. She opened her door and pointed a warning finger at him. Stay here. Reg watched as she pulled grocery bags from the trunk. She walked up to the door and knocked. A blonde woman appeared, and they exchanged words, clearly tense. Eventually, Sally insisted, pushing past the woman with the bags. When Sally returned, she was accompanied by a little girl. They hugged, and Reg quickly ducked lower, hiding behind the car's console. As the woman glanced toward the car, he felt his face flush. Once Sally was back inside, he burst out, What's she doing in a dump like this? Sally's gaze was steely. That's all she can afford. What? Was made good money. Even half of what they had should be enough to get something better than this. Sally's face tightened, and the anger that had been simmering finally boiled over. Wes isn't here, Reg. He drained their accounts and disappeared. She's tried filing for support, but it's hard to serve someone you can't find. Reg fell silent, staring ahead, stunned. Yes, here. This is all she can afford in this school district. She has 2 children. Reg. Sally's voice was tense, every word weighted with frustration. It's the middle of the school year. Their lives are already upended. Does it make sense to force them into a new, unfamiliar school on top of that? Beth's mother has a tiny one-room apartment. Where do you think she could have gone? She's doing her best, working minimum wage after years of being a housewife. The school agreed the kids could stay as long as she lived in the district. It's just an extra half-hour drive each way, not to mention the cost of extended care. Sally's final look was filled with accusation. Thanks to you. Red shifted, defensive. What happened to her Volvo? He couldn't help but notice the old Ford in the driveway, a stark change as a car salesman. She sold it to pay for a lawyer and put down a deposit on this place. It's a lease with an option to buy. Why would she want to buy this place? Sally's gaze turned icy. You're renting an apartment, aren't you? What about your car? I have a good lease. I need to maintain my image, change the car regularly, so buying it isn't worth it. Right, so you own nothing and are tied to no one. She sighed. She's here because it's a good school district. Red shrugged. I live how I want. And how's that working out? They drove in silence, retracing their route. Finally, Reg broke the tension. What's the point of this little trip? He asked, sounding weary. I wanted you to see the consequences of your actions. Her voice softened, but still held an edge. You've known Beth since high school. You knew Wes. You knew her kids. And she's here because of you. Reg squirmed uncomfortably. It was consensual, he muttered, as if trying to justify it. What do you want me to do? Sally glanced at him, unimpressed. Normally, I'd tell you to let your conscience guide you, but in your case, I'm not sure that's reliable. She arched an eyebrow. How many vacations did you take last year? 3, okay, 4 if you count the weekend in Vail. I'm a great salesman, he added defensively. She stared at the road, saying nothing. I could, maybe give her some money, he said slowly, his thoughts gaining momentum. Hey, that house is a dump. Maybe I could hire someone to fix it up, patch things here and there. What do you think? Or something like that, she murmured mysteriously. Meanwhile, Beth sat at her computer, refreshing her account balance for the 3rd time. Her electric bill showed a positive balance of $287, even though she knew she was in debt. Frowning, she picked up the phone. Hello, this is Beth Morin. I have a question about my account. Yes, I'll wait. After being transferred several times, she finally reached someone who could help. My balance shows, yes, but I thought I owed a balance. My last payment was only $40. What? No, I didn't make that payment. Since when? At the main office? Do you know who paid? Oh, you don't? No, that's fine. She set the phone down, her mind racing. Her pride resisted the idea that someone might be trying to help her financially. But looking at the faded, cracked linoleum under her feet, she wondered if she could still afford the luxury of pride. Mom, Jimmy's overflowing the bathtub, her daughter April shouted from the bathroom. Coming, Beth sighed, setting aside her confusion for the moment. By the time she'd cleaned up the bathroom, the mystery payment was nearly forgotten. Dust rose as Reg pushed the mower over the sparse patch of grass that barely qualified as a lawn. He stopped and looked back at the porch, where Sally sat on a plastic chair, a pitcher of lemonade beside her as she made notes. Noticing him pause, she glanced up and pointed back to the yard, clearly expecting him to keep working. Gritting his teeth, he trudged over the bare spots again. This is ridiculous, he thought. I haven't mowed a lawn since I was 15, he muttered when he'd finally finished. This would be way easier if I just paid that guy down the street $20 to do it. I'd have my evening free, and he'd make a few bucks. Everybody wins. Sally ignored his complaint and tore a piece of paper from her notebook, handing it to him. Here. What's this? He asked, taking the paper. It's a list of repairs, replacements, and tasks that need to be done on this house, she said coolly. He scanned the list, his eyes widening. This, this is a long list. I don't even know how to do half of this stuff. That's why I'm giving it to you now. You have time to figure it out. I hear YouTube is good for that. You know, there's a reason I live in an apartment, he muttered. Well, this is part of the whatever it takes attitude you bragged about to Jim. So get the grass out from under the mower, put it in the compost pile, and take it to the shed. Wait, you're supposed to clean the grass off this thing, he said, looking at the mower skeptically. And she doesn't even have a compost pile. Sally's gaze turned steely. Then maybe you should start one. Sally gave him a warm smile. Check number 3 on the list. She poured 2 tall glasses of lemonade, handing him one. Oh, don't look like that. You did well today. Once you're finished cleaning up, I'll treat you to a home-cooked meal as a reward. It's your favorite, lasagna. Reg sighed, swirling his lemonade. All right, what are the rules again? Don't let her know you're helping with the house, she replied, watching him closely. But she'll see the renovations, he countered. Yes, she'll notice the work. Just don't let her find out that you're the one doing it, Sally emphasized. Now come on, we should go before she gets back. Later, as Reg sat poking at his lasagna, Jim asked the inevitable question. So, what have you two been up to all day? Sally took a slow sip of her iced tea before answering. We were at Beth's house while Reg did some renovations. Jim glanced at their 2 teenagers, choosing his words carefully. Oh? He took a bite of his garlic bread. Do you think that's wise? He asked quietly after chewing. Yes, Sally replied simply. The kids looked up, sensing the tension at the table. After dinner, Reg excused himself, and the kids went off to do their homework. Once alone in his office with Sally, Jim tried to keep his tone steady. What are you trying to accomplish here? Sally settled into the sofa. It's simple. Reg was once close to Beth. He has no sense of responsibility or consequences for his actions. He needs to see firsthand the impact he had on someone he once cared about. He needs to put in the effort, even a little bit, to make things right. It's a form of restitution, if nothing else. You should have seen his face when he saw her house for the first time. Jim clasped his hands, choosing his words carefully. How do you think Wes will feel about this? He's going to be furious. It's like throwing Beth's infidelity right back in his face. Sally nodded slowly, understanding. I can see that now. I didn't consider it at first, but you're right. He might see it that way. Then we should stop this, Jim insisted. No, Sally said firmly. She stood, her gaze intense. The person who frustrates me almost as much as Reg and Beth is Wes. 4 months, and he's barely spoken to his wife. He hasn't sent a penny, and he's seen his kids only once. Tell me, why should I care how Wes feels about this? Jim met her gaze, his expression serious. He'll think Beth or Reg is trying to replace him as the father. It could be dangerous. He's a man. We think differently. His voice held a note of caution. Sally's frustration only grew. And you know how Wes could avoid this? By stepping up and being a father. She made a terrible mistake, yes, and she's sorry. If he once loved her, he could find it within himself too, her voice softened. To at least forgive enough to be there for his kids. Jim looked at her, the question plain in his eyes. Would you forgive me? Sally paced the room, thinking carefully, as she always did before responding. If you did this to me, I'd be devastated. I don't know if I'd ever trust you again, but after all we've been through, we've had some amazing years and some awful ones. She smiled wryly. For the sake of the kids, for the sake of all the good memories, I'd try. But please, don't ever put us in that position. Let's learn from their mistakes, okay? She wrapped her arms around him, whispering in his ear, but if you did, I'd make sure you suffered for a long time. She squeezed him playfully, and they both chuckled. Pulling back, her face turned serious. I think Wes should do the same. or at least find a way to stay in his kids' lives. I don't expect him to forgive her completely, but he needs to stop acting like a stranger. Jim nodded slowly. Just remember, I warned you this could end badly, Lucy. He called her that whenever he thought she was up to something especially bold. That night, Jim made an uneasy call. Hello? Wes's voice was sharp. Wes, it's Jim. How have you been? Jim, as in the Jim who knew my wife was cheating on me? That Jim? The one who thought my marriage was a joke? That Jim? His voice dripped with sarcasm. I'm doing just great, Jim. How about you? Jim took a breath, trying to keep calm. I never thought your marriage was a joke, Wes. I told you what I found out because I thought you deserved the truth. I'm sorry if I came off as too blunt. You ruined everything. Jim clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to argue. No, Wes, I told you something you didn't want to hear. And now, after all that, you're siding with Reg over me. How do you spell hypocrite, Jim? I think I can do it in 3 letters. Jim blinked in surprise. It's complicated, Wes. Reg's been trying to make things right. He approached me, wanting to change and apologize. Well, you chose him over me, so save the help. Wes hung up before Jim could get a word in about the kids, child support, or Beth's struggle. Jim stared at the phone, his worry deepening. Later that night, Reg jolted awake from a nightmare, heart pounding. In his dream, a woman he vaguely recognized had threatened him, shoving a gun into his mouth. The terror had felt so real he could still feel his hands shaking. He sat up, his mind whirling as he changed his sheets. For once, he was glad for a supply of clean linens and reached for a simple set of tightly woven cotton, deliberately avoiding the blue satin ones that reminded him of past mistakes. Staggering, Reg made his way to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and staring at his reflection in the mirror. The nightmare's intensity lingered, but he brushed it off, focusing on steadying his breathing. In the living room, he noticed a bottle of scotch on the counter. Despite Sally's and his therapist's concerns, he didn't even glance at it. Alcohol had never held pleasure for him. It served only as a social necessity or a rare sleep aid. His father had drilled the lesson into him over the years. Instead, he turned his attention to his latest purchase, a punching bag on a stand. Wrapping his hands, he felt a wave of relief, grateful he lived on the ground floor with Mrs. McGurty, his nearly deaf neighbor, above. His punches started slow, but gained speed and power, each hit working to expel the remnants of his troubled dreams. The next day, Reg was hunched over, cleaning the grout around a cracked window when Sally marched up, her expression demanding answers. Just then, a truck labeled heating and cooling by Dilbert pulled up in Beth's driveway. What's this? Sally asked, eyeing the truck. It's item number 12 on the list, Reg replied calmly, pulling out the remaining bits of broken glass with a putty knife. It's your list, Reg, Sally reminded him. I told you, you personally hurt her, so you need to personally fix what you can. He looked at her with frustration. And what makes you think I know how to fix an oil boiler? People train for years to handle that stuff safely. I'm not about to risk carbon monoxide poisoning because of your principles. Let the professionals handle this, or I'm walking. Sally studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod. Fine. With a nod of acknowledgement, Reg returned to the window, carefully fitting the new pane into place and securing it with putty. His satisfaction was short-lived, though. His face went pale as Beth's beat-up Ford Focus pulled into the driveway. Her voice was sharp as she got out of the car. How could you do this to me? Beth's gaze locked onto Sally. He's here? Sally kept her calm, gesturing toward the house. Take a breath. Would you like some chamomile tea? Things always look clearer over tea. No, thanks. Beth's voice was tight as she glanced pointedly at Reg. Sally, what is Reg doing here? How's your water heater? Sally asked, pouring tea into 2 cups. No more rusty water? Yes, but we're talking about Reg, Beth insisted, reluctantly accepting the cup. She blew on the tea, taking a slow sip. Sally simply nodded, her expression neutral. And your porch light works now, right? Plus, the bathroom drawers don't stick anymore. Am I speaking into the void? Asked Beth. No. Oh, wait a minute. Sally walked to the back door, where April was swinging from a single rope hanging from a tree, her only entertainment in the yard. Little Jimmy, Beth's son, stood next to Ray, playing with a ball in his hands. Reg, let's get her car done and change the oil. I'll take you to the store as soon as we finish talking. Reg just looked at her and nodded. Oil change? Beth thought with horror about this small but expensive procedure. At Midas, they asked for $50. She was already thinking about looking for a coupon, which was one of the 3,279 items on her personal to-do list. Reg feels guilty, and for obvious reasons. He wants to at least somehow atone for the harm caused. He helps you around the house. You noticed that the work is progressing, right? Yes. Beth was angry at her friends for doing things around the house without her knowledge, but not enough to ask Sally for her keys back or say anything about it. In addition, she was a little depressed by her own feeling of weakness, mixed with remorse for betrayal. I just didn't know it was him, she said. Would it have been better if he had hired a contractor? Would it be easier if Jim did it? Yes, no, I don't know. I definitely don't want him to violate my personal space. Involuntarily, her gaze turned again to the window. I control him every second. He behaves like a true gentleman. Well, as much as Reg can. He doesn't spy or peep. He comes, grumbles, fixes something. And frankly, he would rather just pay someone. So why don't you let him? Beth insisted. He violated, he corrected. Money won't fix what happened to you. You can't help with money, you need to help with work. If he simply paid himself off, we would think that he was simply trying to win back our sympathy for money. What do you think is more valuable to him, money or time? Beth stood up, poured more hot water, added cream and sugar to both cups, and returned to the table. So I'm just a form of punishment, taking away Reg's free time. Is it a stupid idea to pair Reg, and I know that, when Wes is gone? Sally looked at her carefully. I wasn't around during those times, but Jim said you and Reg were a great couple in high school and college. What's happened? Everyone was surprised that you didn't get married. Beth bit her lip and looked down at the table. I left to study, and he stayed here. We sort of took a break. When I returned, he was already chasing every skirt in the city. Who needs a guy like that? Her hands nervously clutched the kitchen towel on the table. Sally assessed her words carefully. I think all the girls he dated, she replied, sipping her tea. So, a pause. Jimmy April, come in, wash your hands, Beth screamed. Sally glanced at her watch. It was a little after 4. Thank you for stopping by and for your good intentions. I need to start making dinner for the kids. And please keep him away from my house. Sally shrugged. As you wish. She stood up and walked to the enclosed back porch. She grabbed the frame through the gap in the mesh to open the door. Reg, no oil changes today. Let's go to my place for dinner. Reg walked dejectedly onto the back porch. Lasagna? Certainly, Sally exclaimed enthusiastically. I prepared a new recipe especially for you. It's vegetarian. Reg's jaw clenched tightly. From the kitchen, to Beth's surprise, someone came up the steps from the basement to the first floor. She had already forgotten about the HVAC van after she saw Reg in her house. So, we cleaned the vents, changed the filters, changed one of the burners, and adjusted the mixture ratio. When was the last time this boiler was cleaned? Asked the master. Judging by the tone, he would have considered an answer within a decade quite acceptable. The worker handed her the bill. Beth looked at him and turned pale. The amount turned out to be more than her weekly salary. Reg silently handed the master a credit card, and he began to fill out the information. What do you mean no oil change? He knew the answer, but some masochistic feeling forced him to ask again. She doesn't want us to help her, Sally shrugged. Reg carefully kept a neutral expression on his face. He didn't look at Beth. She also stared into her cup of tea. Finally, flushed with embarrassment, she turned to the back porch door, looking out into the backyard to let off some steam. Jimmy, Ape, she froze. The children were at the barn and, jumping up and down, enthusiastically showed her something with their hands. What's happening? She turned to Sally and Reg. Boxes with unpacked children's play equipment lay there, and the children pulled her by the hands and thanked her. It's just not fair, Beth said bitterly. Item number 15 on the list, and I didn't make it up, so don't blame me, Reg said with some irritation. I'll just borrow a truck from work and haul it all out of here, he suggested. She shot him a look of hatred, then looked at the bundles of mesh materials and pipes lying next to the playground. Amounts for the services of handymen, improving the quality of life of children, and personal discomfort flashed through her head. Just make sure you stay outside and stay away from my kids, she added bitterly. She failed her marriage, but she couldn't let her children down. However, she again felt a wave of shame for giving in. Man proposes, but God disposes. In fact, Reg was ready to start screaming at these man-planned schemes. He bought an Oriental gaming complex, Jungle Gym Fantasy Swing Set 3. There was nothing like it in Beth's house, and there was nothing like it around as far as the eye could see. There is complete emptiness around, not a single playground, not even the most modest play equipment. Memories from his own childhood prompted Reg to buy something more complex than he had originally planned. Okay, be honest with yourself. He actually bought something much more complicated than he intended. It's just a children's playground. He almost laughed when the salesman strongly recommended using an assembler, and Reg was dumbfounded when he found out the price for installation. How difficult can it be? He quickly understood. Difficult. Very difficult. It was 2 slides, 1 spiral slide, 2 houses, a climbing wall, a tire swing, a horse swing, a monkey bars, 2 towers and rings complicated. The assembly instructions were the size of a telephone directory. He didn't have such a complex as a child, and now he found himself in the unenviable situation of trying to assemble it on his own. Sally's principles and stubborn pride prevented him from seeking help. He was tired of not being able to control his life. This playground will be his ward, although, to be fair, he probably would have had a better chance of sorting out the boiler. He used a set of wrenches to attach one side of the crossbar to one of the frames. Having finally secured it, he moved to the other side to secure it on that side. The other side turned out to be 10 centimeters shorter than necessary. He used the wrong part again. Once again, Reg angrily threw the key on the ground and began kicking the cardboard box, swearing. He was stopped by the ringing laughter of a child. He turned around to see April watching him. "You said a bad word, Uncle. That is, Mr. Raggy. Mom says I can't call you Uncle anymore." "Hi, April. This is fine. You're not allowed to be outside while I'm working, right?" He asked the question in an almost affirmative tone. "Where is Jimmy?" "Everything is fine. Mom is cleaning the house." Her face broke into a wide smile. "Dad will come to us. That is, here, we'll go to the zoo." Her face was beaming with joy. Wrinkling her nose with girlish disgust, she added, "Jimmy is playing his stupid video games." "Is Wes coming here?" Reg's eyes widened. He quickly looked around the yard. The swing was only a quarter assembled, but there was nothing special that would have given away his presence. It was necessary to clean up urgently. "Damn." "Ah," he exclaimed, causing another chuckle. He quickly began gathering his tools. "Baby, you need to go back to the house and draw some drawings for Daddy while I clean up here." "Fine." "Hooray, drawing." She ran across the grass to the newly renovated veranda. Reg put the toolbox in the tiny trunk of his Mustang. He felt the wind begin to change. Clouds were gathering on the horizon, foreshadowing a storm. Looks like the day for going to the zoo didn't go well from the very beginning. "No, Wes, you can't do this." Beth wanted to scream into the phone, but she tried her best to speak calmly. Reg entered her house. He needed to use the restroom before leaving and heard the last words of the conversation. "One day, Just one day. I don't care how busy you are with work. I... Just shut up for a minute. They've been waiting for this for the last 3 days. What should I do now? What should I tell them? I need to work overtime too. Say that you have family circumstances. Beth saw Reg, gave him an angry look, and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Don't you dare put this on me. It's not a trap to serve you with a subpoena. These are your children. Her voice was barely audible through the closed door. The living room was just 3 steps from the entrance. The atmosphere in the house was depressing, like a morgue. Jimmy sat in front of the TV like a zombie. The only thing moving was his fingers. On screen, an armored character leaped into battle and promptly died. Damn, Jimmy whispered. He restarted the game again and died again within 5 seconds. Damn. His face remained emotionless, his eyes glued to the screen. He tried to ignore everything that was happening around him, especially the conversation his mother was having. April sat at the low coffee table. In front of her was a drawing on which a lawn, smiling people, and some kind of yellow creature with a long neck were drawn. She took a red pencil and began to draw a circle in the sky. Then she clenched the pencil tightly in her fist and began to draw angry lines through the shapes on the page, overstepping the edges and leaving marks on the table. Her face was frowning and concentrated, not at all like when she was telling Reg about her upcoming trip to the zoo. Reg. The voice in his memory suddenly surfaced in his consciousness, and before his eyes appeared the image of Mr. Perry, Reg's father, sitting on the sofa next to his son, who, like Jimmy, was also intently looking at the TV screen, clutching a joystick from Ness. Mr. Perry frowned slightly. Take a break from the game. I have something important to tell you. With a heavy sigh, Reg allowed Simon Belmont in Castlevania to be defeated by the ghosts. The battle ended. This console was his consolation gift for his birthday this year, and therefore he did not ask unnecessary questions to his father and pretended to believe in his explanations. Son, your mom called. She won't be able to come for Christmas again this year, but she said she'll send you a couple of gifts. She's sorry, but she couldn't escape. This is her work abroad. His father carefully watched his reaction. Reg struggled with his true feelings. He wanted to scream at his father, accuse him of weakness and lies. At his age, he didn't know how to deal with it. Last year, he received a transformer, supposedly, from his mother. But on the next street in the trash of Wayne Hannigan, whose father worked in the same department as his father, he saw a box from exactly the same transformer, and for some reason Wayne himself did not receive a transformer for Christmas. It was easier for him to believe that Santa Claus brought him a gift than that it was from his mother. In addition, he more than once heard in the conversations of adults such words as ran away and threw away when his relatives thought that he did not hear them. Instead of all this, he said indifferently, "That's good. Thank you, Dad." They sat for a few more seconds, looking at each other. I hope. He sighed and found the courage to continue with difficulty. I hope she's doing well where she is. Maybe next time she can talk to me on the phone. The father shuddered, not expecting such an obvious request. Well, you know how expensive calls abroad are, and with the time difference, with your busyness, it's difficult for her to guess when you're home. She still cares about you. It's just... He paused. Yeah, just. Reg repeated bitterly. Can I get back to the game, Dad? He desperately wanted to immerse himself in a video game and forget himself, to hide from reality, where everything was frighteningly uncertain and complex, where mothers could disappear forever. In the world of games, everything was bright, clear, and logical. The mothers did not leave there. They could have died, but they did not abandon their children. Grateful for the opportunity to end the conversation, his father nodded. Of course, Reg. He got up and went to the garage to his bottle, the existence of which Reg knew, although his father thought it was a secret. My father never got drunk, but sometimes he needed to soften the world a little, and talking about his mother was always difficult for him. Reg waited until his father left and started the game again. However, he played as poorly as ever before. He had to wipe his eyes every few seconds. Reg ran his hand over his forehead, taking a deep breath to calm the memories that came flooding back. He took 3 steps to her bedroom door and knocked. Through the door he heard, "Hello, is this Gloria? Is Mr. Benchley there? Okay, I'll wait." Without waiting for an answer, he opened the door. Beth was on the phone and looking at him when he entered. "So he won't come?" asked Reg. "It's HH," she hissed. "They're not stupid, Beth. When he doesn't show up, they'll understand everything anyway. Will he come?" he asked again insistently. She hesitated and shook her head. "I need to take time off from work." Reg turned to the children. "Children, how about going to Cozy? You'll also be able to buy ice cream." He knew that she would never agree to let the children go with him, so he decided not to give her a choice. "What? No, they can't go with you. Their father." "He's not here." Reg looked at her pleadingly. "You can't just leave them to sit there and worry about it. We need to distract them. Otherwise, they will think about it all day. Longer. Believe me, I really know what they are going through. It's better if they can forget. You can't miss work, and you probably won't be able to find a nanny quickly either. Just once. I won't harm them. You can't. Please let me do it." Jimmy entered the room, his face still concentrated and closed. "Daddy won't come, right?" he asked. When Beth shook her head, he sighed. "I'd like to go to Cozy." "What is Cozy?" April asked, putting her finger in her mouth, which made Beth shocked. She thought that this habit was a thing of the past. "This is a cool science museum. There are electrical things, a car on a swing that you can lift yourself, and rats that play basketball." As he described everything he had heard about the museum from friends, Jimmy's voice began to sound with notes of inspiration. Beth's face showed anguish. "They can go." Her children screamed for joy. Reg was already turning to leave. "Wait." She still held the phone to her ear. "Hello, Mr. Benchley. Would you like me to bring bagels or donuts for breakfast for the team? Okay, see you later." She hung up the phone and, without looking at him, began rummaging through her purse. Finally, she pulled out several $20 bills money she couldn't afford to spend and handed them to him. Reg opened his mouth to object, but when he met her stern gaze, he remained silent and simply accepted the money. He was already withdrawing his hand when she suddenly grabbed his wrist. This was the first physical contact between them since that night. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Reg, don't get attached to them. They're not yours." He looked back in surprise. "They were supposed to be mine." Cozy was a success. Reg finished looping the rope around the stakes around the perimeter of the yard. Walking carefully over the newly laid sod, he ran the hose to the center of the yard and carefully installed the sprinkler. According to the internet, new turf needs time to take root properly. Reg fertilized and loosened the soil underneath so the turf could take deep roots. The rope was supposed to remind Jimmy and April not to run on it, yet while it was so fragile. With his next paycheck, he'll take care of the backyard. Reg found himself whistling. Taking a large knife, he began cutting out the remaining squares of turf to fit the curves of the path. From time to time, the wind blew a few drops of water from the spray onto his back. He looked with a feeling of satisfaction at the 2 new trees in the yard. You will need to remember to turn off the hose later and water their roots properly so that they grow well. A door slam was heard as the spring on the old door frame slammed it shut. Reg looked over his shoulder. By chance, he thought it was time to try to find out the price of a new door. He wasn't sure he'd find a better price at Roush or any home improvement store. Beth appeared on the threshold with a wary expression on her face. She walked to the edge of the steps and squatted in her summer dress, watching him. Reg smiled at her and trimmed the clump of grass again, putting it back in place. The mood was so good that he thought maybe he should try setting up that damn swing again. The children kept asking him about it, and Beth herself once joked about it. "Reg." He stood up and threw the lump into the wheelbarrow with the rest of the scraps and looked at it. "Yes." She looked down at the path briefly and then backed up at him. "Reg, I don't have an easy way to say this. I really appreciate everything you've done for this place. Is it true? But you're getting too attached. I'll repay. Reg raised his hand. Stop. Just stop. Okay. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I think the house finally looks the way you wanted. You got what you wanted, and now that it's done. Goodbye, Reg. She seemed about to object, but he raised his hand again. No, I don't want to know the reason. It's understandable that you did this. Say goodbye to the children from me. I'm sure you've already come up with all the excuses for them. Cutting her off without letting her have her say was a small revenge, but he couldn't help the bitter feeling inside. Long suppressed emotions began to resurface. It felt like a punch to the gut. He walked to the outside faucet and turned off the sprinkler. He no longer had to worry about how deep the turf would root. Mr. Perry walked down from the stands with pride. Even though his son was only a sophomore, Reggie was allowed to play nearly half the game at linebacker. The game turned out well. He earned 2 first downs for the team. As he approached his son, who was in the process of putting his equipment into a bag, Mr. Perry slowed down. Right at home with Reggie, there were 2 girls in cheerleader uniforms. One of them giggled at something Reggie said, touched his arm lightly and smiled at him, then looked at her friend, and they both burst into laughter again. Remembering the past romantic days of his youth, he stood at a respectful distance, looking at the completely uninteresting playing field, pretending to give them privacy, but at the same time watching what was happening out of the corner of his eye. He felt a twinge of nostalgia inside him. He remembered what it was like to be young. However, things didn't go as he expected. The girls waved their pom-poms, giggled, flirted. One of them, apparently infatuated with his son, at one point tugged at his hand, and Mr. Perry thought it would almost be an engraved invitation. But his son smiled slightly, shook his head, and began packing his helmet and equipment into his duffel bag. As the girls left, joining the group of boys and girls, Mr. Perry walked closer to his son. "So, what was that?" he asked. "Oh, it's nothing special. Jenny just wanted to know if I would go to the party with the team." "Phil's mom is having a little gathering," Reggie replied. "And you're not going?" his father asked in surprise. "I have an essay, and I need a loan." "She looked like she wanted you to come." "Jenny." "Yes, that's why I'm not going. She wants us to be a couple." "She seems pretty," the father began. Reggie pushed his bag down. "Yes, Dad, she's cute. And Bernard Bradley also revolves around her all the time. And she broke up with David Winslow, and now suddenly she's paying attention to me. Why would I start dating a girl who's just going to?" He trailed off. The father's face turned pale. "Son, not all girls are like your mother," he said. Just as most families once discussed the reality of Santa Claus, the story of what happened to Reggie's mom became an unspoken understanding between them. There are good ones, those who will appreciate you for who you are and will be there for you. You shouldn't take it so seriously, just go and have fun. If there are so many good girls around, why don't you date anyone yourself, Dad? And by the expression on his father's face, he felt guilty. "Dad, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just, I'm probably not ready yet. I don't understand girls and relationships and all this. I'll try. Is it true? But..." "Yes, I know, son," his father replied, patting him on the shoulder, and together they dragged the heavy bag to his pickup truck. "When you're ready." At home, he raged furiously. Words like "ungrateful woman of easy virtue," "lured," and "took advantage of me" escaped his lips. He tried, Lord, he tried to do something, something to make it up to her, something to feel less guilty. When Reg calmed down a little, he thought about the situation. He did this to her himself. Although not without her help, the bitter side of his soul reminded him. And would he want to see her next to him if everything was the other way around? After all, she was unwilling and unable to accept his help. Jimmy and April will get hurt. Reg frowned. Whatever happened, Beth and he deserved what they got, but not the kids. He remembered his childhood. Someone owed them something. He picked up the phone book. "Turner and Partners Agency," came a hoarse voice on the phone. "Yes, I need you to find someone," Reg replied. In fact, I have a few people I would like you to check on, Reg added after a moment of thought. There was one couple in particular he wanted to tackle, the two who beat him. He would have to keep them in sight, although he didn't yet know why. They made an appointment. Jim's plan to bring Reg together with Hank and Phil to reconcile within a week failed. Phil needed a new roof on his house. Since they had all spent several summers together working roofing jobs back in high school and college, it seemed stupid to actually pay someone to do it for them. At least that's how Jim explained it to Phil, who was always famous for his stinginess. Bringing everyone together, including Reg, for work seemed like a good idea to remind them of their past together and strengthen their friendship. Jim didn't want them to forget what Reg did, he wanted them to remember that. But his other qualities too. Plus, he now has a free worker at home, like Beth, Reg noted, taking out a brand new set of tools from the trunk of his Mustang. That's a pretty lousy attitude, Jim frowned. I'm sorry that things didn't work out the way my wife and Beth thought they would, but I'm trying. I understand, Reg replied. They walked along the well-kept path to the lawyer's house. A little later he added, "Thank you for all this. You were better to me than I deserve." I know. That's why it's called mercy. It cannot be earned. It should be a gift. The door opened and Kelly DeVecchio, Phil's daughter, a pretty blonde girl, came out of the house. Kelly and her friend turned around and shouted through the open door, "We're going to Barbara, Mom. We're on foot." Reg looked at both girls carefully. The blonde's backpack was heavy, and Kelly's bright yellow backpack hung on her back like an empty balloon. "Look ahead," Jim hissed quietly in his ear. "Yes," Reg answered absently. "Didn't Phil buy us a drink a couple of months ago when Kelly passed her license, and then complain all night that now he couldn't sleep well? I wasn't there then. It was you. And what?" "Yeah, that's okay," Reg answered, following the girls with his eyes until they climbed the hill along the road. Going upstairs, Reg noticed that the blonde went west and Kelly went east. He shook his head. "Let's go to work," Jim insisted. Phil's wife, Wendy, greeted them coolly, and the greetings were formal. No coffee was offered. In the yard, there were pallets of tiles, ladders, and tool belts. At first, Phil and Hank just looked at him. "Well then," Hank finally said to Jim, "let's get started." They took shovels to remove tiles from the roof. For the first hour, almost nothing was said. "So you finally stopped trying to get Beth to cheat on you again?" Phil finally blurted out. "What?" Reg asked in surprise. You go to see her regularly. It's mind-boggling that you have the nerve to do this. I tried to apologize. I wanted to do something to make it up to her. I just didn't know how," Reg explained. "Quiet," Jim shouted. "Yes, of course," Hank added. "We all heard about your apology." Reg turned slowly towards them. "Yes, we heard. And you demanded me to tell you stories again and again. It was all fun while someone else was suffering. At least Jim had the courage and character to immediately cut off contact with me. And you two suddenly decided to become such saints when it was already too late. Are you saying it's our fault?" Phil asked, picking at a stuck nail with a nail puller. "No, I'm saying you're damn hypocrites," Reg answered simply. From the roof, he saw a yellow Camaro turn onto a side street. He saw someone with a yellow backpack look into the open car window. "By the way, how is Kelly?" Reg asked, frowning. At that moment, Phil swung his hammer, aiming for Reg's ankle. Luckily for Reg, it was the first floor. The rose bushes he fell on were quite strong, although at that moment this seemed like a dubious blessing to him. Reg limped over to the picnic bench. "Why did you do this?" He massaged his knee and elbow. "Stay away from my daughter." "Jim, what were you thinking? This guy will always chase skirts. He is unable to control himself." Phil shouted, going down the stairs from the roof with Jim and Hank. "That's not true," Reg answered quietly but firmly. "I can't believe you let him into our lives again. Aren't you afraid for Sally, that he'll start making moves on her too?" "He's a snake," Phil continued. "Go to hell, Phil." "Jim shouldn't worry," Reg snapped. "Why not?" Because he is my friend and because she loves him. Big deal. You can persuade anyone. Wes was a friend too. Reg began to laugh quietly. You don't know anything, and it's so funny I can't even explain it. I remember how three of you couldn't wait to hear my stories. How this or that girl did what she did not do for her husband. And you all loved listening to it. What were you saying, Phil? You were the only one who had a sex life, you idiot. While you were all enjoying my stories, good old Wes, our decent Wes, couldn't wait to say, Reg, you dirty bastard, how can you sleep with other men's wives? But behind closed doors, Wes kept asking me to take him with you to the hunt. He wanted to go to bars with me, just the two of us, like friends. He had Beth at home, and despite that, he wanted. Wes was your friend. He was never my friend. Reg's face tensed and his hands clenched into fists. What was that? Asked Jim. This was new information for him. Are you worried about me and your daughter, Phil? So, all these girls are also someone's daughters. What about the girl you, Hank, dumped? Or that little incident you paid for in college, Phil? You've ruined the lives of others, but only your own daughters and friends somehow matter to you. And the main question, why? Have any of you ever wondered why women who swore fidelity to God, their families, and their husbands were suddenly willing to risk everything and do something you thought they would never do? How lonely does a woman have to be to decide to do this? Do you think I seduced them all? You're just idiots. Many of them approached me themselves. Do you think I was specifically looking for married women? I was just talking to pretty girls. I danced with them, listened to them. That's it. If she didn't care about her marriage, then why should I care? Their husbands were so busy with important things, work, workshop, hunting with friends or games, that they could not even buy a bouquet of flowers for $15 at Kroger, unless on Valentine's Day, and then at the last minute. Reg sighed and continued. One such woman called me one day on Valentine's Day. She invited me to her home. Her husband, as always, was dealing with the next super important task of the week at work, which took the place of last week's critical task, and was already preparing to move on to the next incredibly important task of the next week. And at this time, the person with whom he exchanged vows remained abandoned, and not for the first, and not for the second, and not even for the 20th time. She cried when I told her that I already had a date for that evening. She was crying. Reg's face became gloomy. How should I have reacted to this? You treat me like a pest, but I'm just a symptom of truly sick marriages. Jim stood to the side, arms crossed and head down, listening to their exchange. You present all this as if you were providing some kind of public service and not destroying other people's relationships, Jim said. No, I didn't help. Reg wilted a little. Most of these women were already on the road to divorce. They just decided to ride Reg before leaving. He took another look at Phil, just like Wendy. What? You son of a bitch, dare to tell me that you got laid? Hank and Jim quickly grabbed Phil to hold him back. I've never slept with Wendy, but you're 2 years at most away from her leaving you or cheating on you. Quiet, Phil. What do you mean, Reg? Asked Hank. She stopped pestering him about his weight. For the past 10 years, she had been worried about his heart, about his blood pressure, about his weight, but he didn't care. Now she has stopped worrying too. She gave up. I see it in her eyes. He doesn't care about her view of things, and now she doesn't care about him anymore. I have a slow metabolism, Phil answered hesitantly. This is not the point. She wants to see that you are at least trying. It's important for her to know that you value her enough to do something about it. And all she sees is that you prefer another Cannelly instead of an extra 5 years of life with her and the children. If I really wanted to hit on Wendy, it wouldn't be hard. And you yourself brought her to this. Reg shook his head. You know what? It's not worth it. I thought there was a way to fix everything, but there isn't. He turned around and walked away. Jim called out to him. Reg, don't go like that. Everything can be worked out. Everything has already been decided. But stay, collect your tools. We'll talk. I use these tools just to help you guys. I don't need them anymore. I live in an apartment, remember? The Mustang's door slammed shut with finality. Out of curiosity, Reg drove east and slowed down as he passed the side street where he had seen the Camaro. Kelly was in full view. Some skinny guy with greasy hair kissed her deeply. Reg moved on. Phil's problems no longer concerned him. That night, when he returned to his apartment after visiting Phil, Reg received a call. "Mr. Perry, I need to meet with you." "When will you be able to?" The voice sounded with a hint of anxiety. "What's the problem?" "Well, I have some information you asked for, and something for you," Mr. Turner replied. "How about Buffalo Wild Wings in Grove City at 7 p.m.? "Wonderful." Mr. Turner, the private investigator Reg had hired, was sitting at the bar. Reg sat down next to him and ordered a Coke. The detective, slightly nervous, took a sip of beer and handed him an envelope. At the first request, everything turned out to be easy. Here is his address and information about his new car. He still works for the same company, but now he mostly works from his apartment. He registered as a private entrepreneur and works under contract to hide his income. That's why her lawyers couldn't find him. They looked in other databases, Turner explained. Reg took the envelope without opening it. He himself did not know what exactly he was going to do with it. "What about the second case?" he asked. Mr. Turner sighed heavily. "I have bad news for you." He shifted in his chair and looked around nervously again. "Yes." Now Reg began to get nervous, looking around the hall. "Okay, I don't know how to tell you this, but I found out. I went to several bars, including the one you recommended. Few recognized her, but every now and then there was someone who remembered her. She's memorable, likes to dance and drink, but never gets drunk. The man she usually hangs out with is remembered less well, but that's typical, right?" He licked his lips nervously. "Am I sure of their names? Because I heard a bunch of different names. Curtis, Andrea, Guy, Phelan, Blondie, Tyler, and even Treasure. I think these are the same people. The only serious clue is the GPS bracelet she wears." Turner stretched, as if stretching his neck. "So I'm asking questions in one of the bars, and then the bartender says that he will do me a favor if he doesn't snitch on me. It turns out they offer rewards in the places they go. If someone starts looking for them, they pay 1,000 to the first person who calls them confirming that they are looking for them. 500 to the second. This bartender was an acquaintance of mine, so he didn't give me away, but I've already been to many places, and here," he handed Reg a plastic card. "Someone broke into my office. I found this on my desk next to your file. What have you gotten me into?" the detective asked accusingly. Reg looked at the card. It was his old driver's license, stolen by the couple who beat him up in the bar that fateful night. Then their threats seemed to him just empty words. But now, he began to shake. As is the case with many owners of expensive cars, Reg parked far away from other cars, leaving empty spaces on either side of his beloved Mustang. A blue Dodge Charger pulled up right next to his car. A laughing blonde came out of the driver's side. One of her sneakers was clearly untied. And she said, "Not in this life." She looked around the restaurant parking lot. "I don't see your car. Where is she?" "No, she's not here. You said Grove City, right?" "Oh, Dublin?" "No, no, no. You said Grove City. Damn, I didn't go there." "Okay, I'll be there soon." She looked down and noticed that her sneaker was untied. I sat down to tie it. After that, her hand plunged into her purse, and rising to her feet, she rested her palm on the Mustang's wheel to stand. Her hand remained empty, but the GPS tracker was already securely attached to Reg's car. The blonde got into the Charger and drove off. All this took 20 seconds. Andrea no longer had the bracelet on her wrist. Curtis, meanwhile, waited until a crowd passed in front of the bar's windows and tore off the second GPS tracker from the detective's car. "Why didn't you try to talk to him? Why didn't you call?" Sally demanded an answer from her husband. "He tried to change." Jim rubbed his face with his hands. "The guys put a lot of pressure on me. They're nowhere near ready to forgive Reg for anything, and I'm not sure I'm ready either. He doesn't answer my calls. and neither does Wes. So, yes, I visited him. Jim paused, puzzled. Reg moved out. According to his tenant, he moved out overnight. He was there one day, and the next day he took the day off, gave up his deposit, and left. I saw his car at the dealer, so he hasn't disappeared, but I think we just need to let everyone cool down and figure it out. But Sally tried to object. Honey, he has to want forgiveness, and everyone else has to want to give it too. We put too much pressure on everyone. Sally reluctantly agreed. Hello, Dad. Reg ran into the house, almost running. Mr. Perry looked up from his cooking. His son looked more energetic than usual, his face glowing. What happened, son? At first, Reggie wanted to act indifferent, as if nothing special had happened, but he could hardly contain himself from excitement. Finally, holding his breath with difficulty, he blurted out, Dad, I'm dating a girl. With a good girl. Real true. She's not at all like. She's different. We like the same things, the same music. Dad, it's special. Enthusiasm was just pouring out of him. Mr. Perry already had a warning on the tip of his tongue about being too enthusiastic, but he remembered how reckless he was at his age and restrained himself. Let your son enjoy this moment. But this turned out to be more than just a moment. Junior and senior years were completely different in the Perry household. Beth became a part of their lives and brought stability and gentleness to their son that he had previously lacked. Both seemed crazy about each other. Mr. Perry smiled as he watched their love grow stronger. So we're in the hotel room, and as usual, she has doubts at the last moment, as they always do. Or maybe she just decided to embellish herself before the finale, I don't know. Brett, real name Harvey, took a sip of his martini. And what happened next? Claude George asked the rest of the table. Well, I did the standard thing. I turned off the sound on her phone so that she wouldn't receive reminders from home, but the device continued to blink. Finally, it vibrated with another message. Some stupid text message. What's the message? Reg asked, draining his glass and waving to the waitress Stephanie. He needed more booze. I don't know. Something like 911, come back immediately from her stupid cuckold husband. Brett Harvey shrugged indifferently. So what did you do? Continued Claude George. What do you think? I haven't gotten what I wanted yet. I wasn't going to let her go home without finishing my job, so I just knocked over her purse as if she had dropped it herself, and the phone accidentally rolled under the bed. Brett Harvey chuckled. Did she have children? Reg suddenly asked. Who cares? Brett Harvey answered with complete frankness. It had been 2 months since Reg had been avoiding his old friends. Jim called sometimes, but Reg tried not to answer. For 2 months he lived in an empty apartment. His friends didn't want to see him anymore. They made this clear. For them he became unclean. Now he was stuck here, with these players, and he judged himself more harshly every day. He noticed that his acting skills, usually quite good, were now being tested. All this has long ceased to bring him pleasure. They say a man is judged by his surroundings. And now Reg has extremely harsh feelings towards himself. He scratched the red lines on the table, as if with a pencil. He blinked. There were no red pencil lines on the table. Great, now he's starting to hallucinate. Oh, can you imagine? I got kicked out of a place last week. They said that I was not the client they needed, Claude George added to the conversation. Seriously? This happened to me a couple of months ago. They also told me that I was not the client they wanted. What was the name of this place? Asked Brett Harvey. Second Chance Salon, replied Claude George. Oh, look, it seems that Hector can pick up someone. Reg, who was in a gloomy mood, looked up from his glass. Hector was dancing with a slightly tipsy blonde, judging by her slightly hesitant movements. Reg felt a moment of panic at the sight of her blonde hair. It was similar to Andrea's, but the woman was too tall. However, her way of moving seemed vaguely familiar to Reg. They twirled to the music. It was Beth. Reg watched the dance, thinking gloomily. Hector spun her around, brought her drinks, touched her unobtrusively, adjusting to the rhythm. They clung to each other, laughing at some witty remarks. Reg knew every step, every turn, every movement of this dance. He danced it himself countless times. He felt a little relieved that Beth's friends, with whom she came, were actively interfering with Hector in his attempts. But then he noticed how Beth took a napkin, wrote something on it, and handed it to Hector, saying goodbye to him. Her friends went to the bar to pay, and Hector slipped outside, returning just a couple of minutes later with a mysterious smile on his face. Hector insisted on one last dance until Beth's friends left the bar. Reg clenched his teeth. Reg parked. It was an early model Ford Escort, purchased at his car dealer's sale. The company's management liked it better when their salespeople drove more substantial cars, but Reg had expenses, or more accurately, they were. He was glad that his father's car was missing. Now he didn't want to talk to anyone at all. He closed the garage door behind the car and entered the house through the kitchen door. Sitting down at the table, he lowered his head. There was a drop of tomato sauce left on the shirt. The shirt was ruined, like everything else in his life. A random thought occurred to him, and he took out a business card from his wallet. It was only 7 o'clock in the evening. Early dinner, public place. She even paid for it herself. How could he not notice? An ideal situation for the conversation, or more accurately, the shout-out. There was still time. The store was still open, according to the hours on the business card. He stood up, walked over to the phone on the wall, and, leaning his other hand on the wall next to the refrigerator, dialed 7 numbers from the card. "Hello, Mr. Arpad." "Yes, this is Reggie. Reg Perry." He could hardly force himself to speak in a normal tone. "Yes, everything is fine. No, I'm not calling about the next payment. I know you're happy, but I want my deposit back." He tried to give his voice a casual, reckless sound. "Well, relationships. When do they even work, right?" "Yes, I'll come by tomorrow to pick up the money." Reg noticed that with his other hand, he was mechanically knocking on the wall with his fist. He forced himself to stop. "No, I don't need a watch, but thanks for the offer. I have something else in mind. 4 years, 4 years, 4 years." This phrase was spinning in his head. He knew he looked attractive. He had good grades in school, even if he was not an outstanding student. He played sports. He was faithful and reliable. Many of Beth's friends flirted with him, not to mention the other girls. Obviously, all this was not enough for the relationship. Fuck relationships. Maybe it's time for Reggie to stop taking women seriously. Time to focus on himself and, as his father told him, just have fun. He dialed the next number from memory. "Hello, Dave. This is Reg. The bosses are picking on me here because of the car. We still have that blue Mustang on the set, right? Great. I'll take it. Let others not touch him." "No, we will arrange leasing. Why bother with a purchase, right? Selling escort. How stupid do you have to be to drive this cheap thing? Some loser husbands drive such economical junk. Modest cars don't make women successful. To catch something, you need the right bait. I wonder if Melody is free for the weekend. She always flirted with him. It's time to shed the ballast and be realistic about women's fidelity." Beth, he called out to her as they left the bar. Oh, hi, Reggie. "No, it's too late. I don't need help. Hector will take care of me," she said. Behind her, Hector winked at Reg, believing that he would support him, following the man code. Hector himself did not understand why Reg was suddenly interfering in his business. "Hector," Reg nodded neutrally. "Since I live not far from her, I'll give her a lift myself." Reg tried to maintain goodwill in his tone. But Hector didn't fall for it. "I've already taken care of everything," he answered defiantly. "Yes, he will take care of me. What are you doing here anyway? You should be looking for someone to sleep with, right?" Beth muttered, holding the doctor's hand. Alcohol clearly had a bad effect on her, and Hector began to boil. It was time to put an end to this. "Hector, isn't it bowling night?" Reg asked meaningfully. "Yeah," Hector grinned, but then the crux of the matter dawned on him. "Why the hell are you hinting at bowling?" Hector had an alibi for his wife, bowling nights. "Sorry," Reg continued. She's just a friend of a friend, and I can't leave her in this state. She's a grown woman, Hector answered with a threat in his voice. Yes, I'm an adult. Hey, are you saying I'm fat? Or that I, a woman of easy virtue? Beth looked at Hector with a dull look. He says he forgot what day it is because he wants to lie to Cynthia that he was bowling, and Hector wants me to confirm it since I'm on the team, Reg noted with obvious mockery. Fuck you, Hector swore. He shifted from foot to foot, deciding whether he should say something or whether it was better to retreat. Fuck you both. Turning sharply, he headed towards his car and took off sharply, tires squealing. Reg realized that his relationship with the Playa posse was finally overdue to this conflict with Hector, and, in his opinion, for good reason. Well, now you've ruined everything. He had to give me a ride home. What about your car? He asked her. It won't start. Plus, he was cute. He was looking for an easily accessible victim. Of course he was nice, Reg said, walking over to his car and taking a screwdriver out of the glove compartment. What do you care about? You are not my master. We're divorced, remember? Maybe even in your long line of victories, you'll remember me and Wes a little, she said, sobering up slightly, but this only made her appearance more unpleasant. Although I suspect you may have forgotten. There are too many of them. Look, I know it was a mistake. I'm sorry I hurt you and the kids, but I won't let you wake up tomorrow and regret letting that idiot take advantage of you. It will eat you up from the inside, he said, starting to fumble under the hood until the lid opened. There was her battery with the positive wire disconnected from the terminal, especially if you did it while drunk and fell for such a cheap trap. You should know, she snapped. Yes, because I'm just like Hector, right? He answered quietly, remembering the conversation with Jim, although I don't think I've reached his level. For now, his subconscious added, reminding him of what he tried to do with that couple at the bar. My side still ached at the memory of it. Yes, and that's the worst thing about being with you, she shouted. It wasn't about the sex, it wasn't about the fact that I did it. And in comparison, what? I was with you because I wanted to remember how it was once. I wasn't happy with Wes. I remembered what you were like, what we were like back then. You had so much hope. I loved you. I wanted to feel it again. And now I have to compare you then with who you have become today, and I hate it. And the worst thing is that you made me the same as you. She turned away, her shoulders shook, and she covered her face with her hand. He closed his eyes for a few seconds. Then, in full accordance with his depressed mood, he said, I understand perfectly well what you think about me. You clearly didn't keep this a secret. You're too drunk to drive, and I'm not going to add to my guilt by having you get a Dewey ticket or get into an accident. Get in my car. Reg. She realized that she had crossed the line and extended her hand to him. Get in the damn car. She can pick up her car tomorrow. He definitely wasn't going to risk his own. There was silence on the way to her house. When he stopped at her house, she said quietly, Sorry, that was inappropriate. Yes, whatever you say. Wine reveals the truth. Give the children a farewell message from me. Reg. Are you home? You have adult responsibilities, unlike me. Maybe if I hurry, I can find a couple of drunken fools before the bar closes. Just come out. Silently, she left. 2 weeks have passed. 2 weeks during which he avoided her calls. 2 weeks and 6 sessions with Dr. Fredericks. 2 weeks filled with long working hours and returning to an empty new apartment that seemed lifeless. Without women, its walls echoed loudly. Without alcohol, it seemed cramped. He couldn't turn off his phone because of work, and this only made him feel more depressed. The phone was ringing, and he had to look at the screen, see her number, and click reject. At first, it was 2 calls a day. Thank God he had a phone that allowed him to delete messages without listening to them. He already knew what she wanted to say. She wanted to apologize, but it didn't mean anything. She said what she felt. She was simply ashamed that she had said this to him, and he was angry and hurt enough to deny her the relief of an apology. He had to accept responsibility for his actions. Her actions remained on her conscience. And yet, in the darkness of the night, he realized that he could solve the problem simply by changing his phone number. He couldn't take that step. This would mean the end of his entire previous life. Complete end. Self-hatred has become a serious problem. Thanks to video games, they filled the silence. A couple of times he almost went to the bank to cancel direct deposits into her utility bills. Why should she get money or help from a worthless bastard? Dirty money. But, children, he did hurt her. He did target her, and her whole family suffered. He was angry. No, furiously angry at her. But he decided not to spread it to the children. The doctor made it clear he is responsible for his own reaction to the actions of others. She hurt his feelings. And the saddest thing is that much of what she said was true. Children have even less control over their lives than Beth, and he do. He wasn't going to take it out on them. Besides, without alcohol and dating, what else could he spend his money on? One day, returning from the gym, he noticed an envelope on the table that Mr. Turner gave him. He could fix some things in her life. He owed Beth the opportunity to sort out some of her difficulties. And there was someone who seriously owed April and Jimmy. One call to her lawyer and the address and reg solved Beth's money problems, at least potentially. Repressed memories of days long ago resurfaced, and he woke up several times during the night, shaking in his bed. At the end of the second week, he received a message to which he could not help but respond. 911, call back immediately. It was Jim's number. Reg called back. "Hi, Jim," he said languidly. Reg, pause. "Listen, we have a little problem here." He heard Phil scream in the background. "Is she there? Is she with him?" "What's going on, Jim?" Reg, "Never mind. It's just a courtesy call. You see, Kelly ran away from home a couple of days ago. And you thought that I might have it?" His voice began to fill with anger. No, not seriously. But we're calling everyone we can think of and would appreciate it if you could look after her." "Well, what if she sneaks into the club or something?" Jim fell silent. "Yes, sure. Trusty old Reg should see her, of course. I don't go to clubs anymore." The doctor's words resurfaced in his mind. He chooses how to react to the actions of other people. He pondered the situation for a few moments in silence. "Listen, I'll come now. Are you at his house?" "What?" "Yes, just a warning. Wendy's not really. She's very upset, and, well, Sally and Beth are here too to call and ride and support. I know there's a little between you two. Is it tense?" "Yes, but I'm an adult. I can handle it." Reg hung up. There were several cars parked in the yard, so Reg had to park his Mustang on the street. He didn't have time to knock on the door because Jim opened it while he was still on his way. "Thank you for coming. I think it will mean a lot to them." Phil just snaps at everyone, so if he says anything, just ignore him. He had just returned from driving around the city all day looking for her. "It's okay." Reg walked into the room where Phil was nervously pacing back and forth. Without giving him time to say anything, he handed him his keys, phone, and wallet. "Here, these are the spare keys to my apartment. These are my credit cards. This is my phone with call records for the last month. You can check if you want to see if I was there or if I rented a room somewhere," he said firmly. Phil, regaining his composure, became embarrassed. No, there's no need for that. Thank you for coming. But what I really need is for you to drive around the city and look for her. For goodness sake. Can I look into her room?" "What? Why do you need her room?" "Just trust me." Things lay on the floor next to the built-in alcove by the window. There was also a striped box with dust on it. Reg picked up a cushion from the window seat. As he had expected, there was a door leading to a dusty space where the shadow of a box of the same size remained. Was she hiding something from her parents? Prohibited substances? Clothes? A lace skirt ran along the bottom edge of the bed, and several posters hung on the walls prints and images of a boy band. On the pine table lay a Bible and an envelope on top of ordinary papers. He looked inside the envelope. Empty. There was a trace left on the pages of the Bible, a square imprint on the paper where something had obviously been lying for a long time. Reg attached the envelope to the print. It was a perfect fit. Looking at the bookshelf, he noticed an empty space on the bottom shelf, exactly the size of a Bible. "Is she religious?" he asked Phil, who was watching him. Reg looked behind the table, where he saw an empty socket. The other contained an adapter with a half-dozen plugs from his stereo, lamp, and other electronic devices. "What? We go to church, but no, not that much." Reg examined the Bible, no dust. The remaining books on the bottom shelf are covered in dust. He ran his hand over the spines of the books, studying them, and picked up last year's school yearbook. Lazily flipping through the pages, he found the photo he needed, closed the album, and put it back. Without saying a word, he left the house, got into his car, and drove away. Wes tossed the keys to his Audi in the air and caught them as he ran down the steps of his new apartment. He was running late and decided to have dinner at Mitchell's and then head to the short north, where he could try to find someone to date. Because of this, he didn't look where he was going and almost ran into the blonde. He paused, taking a moment to peek into her cleavage as he moved down the steps. She looked at him and smiled widely. "Hello," her joyful tone warmed his soul. "Are you, by any chance, Wesley Morin?" He answered her with a charming smile, hoping that she would impress. "Do we know each other?" "A friend told me I should look up a certain Wes Morin if I meet him," she said, popping a bubblegum bubble. Inwardly, he winced at this bad habit, but immediately imagined how the blonde's flexible tongue could be used in other situations. If she chews gum, her tongue must be well developed. Guilty. "Looks like you found me. Maybe you have handcuffs," he tried to joke. "No, no handcuffs. Here, you have received a summons." She thrust a manila envelope into his hands, turned around, and he saw how her rounded hips swayed attractively as she headed to her car. In the envelope, he found a copy of a child support and alimony withholding order sent to his employer and a writ of execution ordering him to return $120,000 in retirement funds, savings, and other funds he had withdrawn from their joint accounts. Wes seethed with anger. Kelly wasn't kidnapped, she escaped. It was not difficult to understand from the furnishings of her room. Some of her things were missing. The empty envelope in the Bible must have been her hiding place for money, and he didn't see a phone charger on the table. He was going to find her, but his motives were a little confusing. Basically, it was a desire to prove to everyone that he could do something they couldn't, and then throw it in their faces. How dare they suspect him of allegedly preying on the women around them? However, he winced at the thought. This is exactly what he did. It seemed that he had to prove to them that he was no longer like that he no longer wanted to be considered that kind of person, that he himself does not want to consider himself like that. So, no matter what motivated him, Reg needed to find out where she was. After all, most girls her age run away and return within a couple of days, and usually their girlfriends have their back. However, he already knew who he needed to turn to find out the truth, the blonde who covered up her meeting with that vile guy a couple of months ago, Paul in French. A couple of calls and conversations, and he found out her address. It took a couple of hours to wait for her to return home. However, it was not difficult to get her to speak. Surprisingly little effort. But Paulin really wanted to talk. With every word she said, Reg's heart became heavier. He originally wanted to do this to spite others, but now his motives have become unclear. Kelly ran away, but Paulin doubted that she really wanted to run away. Moreover, Paulin was scared to death. Reg was forced to make some difficult decisions, and the one that was best for her turned out to be the worst for him. With great apprehension, he pulled out the second manila envelope Mr. Turner had given him. A disturbingly thin dossier on Curtis and Andrea. This was the third bar that evening, and Reg was still having no luck. Growing increasingly nervous, he was already thinking about calling the police. But I haven't decided yet. He wanted to settle everything without government intervention, so as not to harm Kelly. The waitress approached him. "What will you order?" The question she asked 100 times during the evening sounded almost unintelligible. Her name tag said Daisy. Reg handed her a 20, and she looked at him in surprise. No, no, don't think anything like that. I'm looking for my friend. Blonde. She wears a strange bracelet with a glowing element. She usually has a tall guy with her, maybe in a leather jacket. If she's your friend, why would you pay to find her? The waitress asked suspiciously. Girlfriend may be a strong word. I just didn't write down their numbers, but I really need to contact them. Time is running out, you know, Reg said, trying to be as charming as possible. Well, they were here last week. She clearly didn't know whether to continue. Will there be any trouble here? No, look, I understand. I'm a stranger to you. I come up and ask about some girl. Understand. He handed her his business card and showed her his driver's license. If you find out anything, if you suddenly see them or somehow contact them, tell them to call me. Please, okay? He left her a card and a 20, which she put in her apron. He got up to try to find them at another bar. The waitress looked after him. Jenny, can you relieve me for 5 minutes? I'll go out for a smoke. Going outside with her purse, she took out a phone and another business card, on which only one number was printed. Andrea and Curtis had sex. Call. There was a small cabinet attached to the wall. She opened the doors inside. There were compartments, each of which contained one mobile phone. Call. She took the one that was glowing and turned it over to read the 3 names on the paper tag on the back. She pulled out a personal organizer from her desk drawer. Call. Hello? Who is this? Daisy? Hello. How are you? She found the letter D and read the notes about it, checking what name she used there. How is your boy Blake? Oh, was it? Tall, light brown, said his name was Reg. No, there won't be any trouble. No, I just want to avoid him. I knew that he would look for me. He's a complete stalker, I told you. I don't think I'm the first person he's followed like that. There are probably a lot of evil people who are looking for him. She opened the laptop, entered the login password, removed the encryption, and turned on the GPS tracker. Thanks a lot. Well, who wants that kind of drama? Yes. Thanks again. Yes. Buy Blake something nice. Bye. Problems. Curtis was drying himself with a towel. When do they not happen? She answered. He's still trying to find us. He went to the kitchen cabinet and placed his hands on either side of the row of cookbooks on the shelf, and in one motion removed them from the cabinet, placing them on the table. He then took a heavy magnet from the refrigerator and placed it on the wall behind the books. Using a magnet, he opened an entire panel of drywall, behind which was a hidden alcove containing several metal cases, each neatly labeled. I think I was more than fair with him. This is the 3rd warning he's ignored, Curtis said, taking out one of the cases. He was heavy. Reg sighed. This was the 10th establishment his detective had identified as possible locations for their appearance. They seemed to be deliberately changing places to stay in the shadows. This was a worrying sign. The chance was slim, but it was the only chance he had. He mentally went through his options, almost ready to go to the police with the information he had. However, he still hesitated. He wanted to handle it himself, without involving the police and without ruining Kelly's life. Climbing into the car, he closed the door. A muffled voice was heard through the window. Hey, Mr. Perry, I know where those people are. Outside the window, he saw a dress with a low neckline, which showed 2 curves, in his professional opinion, supported by a push-up bra. Black strands of hair beautifully framed her cleavage. Reg pressed the button to roll down the window and leaned down, trying to see the girl's face. A cold hand reached out the window, and he saw her face as she leaned in and kissed him on the lips. In her left hand, holding the clutch, she moved her hand further. She dropped her purse into his lap, and that's when he noticed there was a stun gun hidden behind it. In horror, he realized that in front of him was Andrea, with a wig. Purring to herself, she unzipped her clutch, bending down so that he could see her breasts. Then she took out a syringe. Start from 0 and count to your number, she whispered. I don't understand this, Curtis said. Imagine putting 2 people in heaven. telling them that they are the lords of creation, and all they have to do is not eat one single fruit. From one tree, thousands of others can be eaten. They are not even required to do anything, just not to do it. This is some kind of defect in the human form. Why do people mistake patience for weakness? Honey, you're lecturing again. And the phrase is not like that. They say it, mistaking kindness for weakness. Curtis grinned. I'm allowed. I'm the bad guy. And I am more than sure that kindness is not one of my shortcomings. Are you asking me or him? Andrea pointed her head towards Reg, putting on a simple blouse and black leggings with boots. Her dress and shoes went carelessly into her bag. His, in this case, was Reg. He was sitting on the ground, bent down, his knees tucked under him, his forehead resting on the ground, and his feet were tied with a zip tie. His hands were cuffed in soft handcuffs behind his back, and an elastic bandage was wrapped around his head and mouth. Gradually, he began to rise, coming to his senses after the short effect of anesthesia. He sat a few meters from the edge of an abandoned quarry, at the bottom of which water sparkled in the moonlight. I think he's biased, Curtis noted. So do I, she answered with a smile, but then her face darkened slightly. She thought for a moment, and he waited for her answer. It's not that simple. He was looking for us and was unarmed. Curtis pouted and thought about it. I don't understand how this complicates things. The fact that he was looking for us without a weapon rather confirms everything I say about the intelligence of people and about the colossal flaws in the American educational system, which feeds naivety and narrow-mindedness. Is this some kind of moral dilemma about how killing an unarmed person is bad? She shrugged. Okay, I was interested. They both looked around the abandoned quarry. There was no one nearby. Curtis took out a knife and cut the bandage. Reg spat out a piece of bandage. What do you want, Reginald Perry? I'm not armed. I didn't contact the police. I didn't tell anyone at all. I don't even want to see you. The last thing I want is to see you too. He paused and looked at them, waiting for their reaction. He licked his lips nervously. But I want to offer you a job. Silence. Then Curtis repeated slowly, as if Reg's words intrigued him. A job? Freak, Andrea shouted at him. I finally calmed him down, she nodded at Curtis. His work didn't bring us too much trouble. I was even invited to the Avon party. I have a house. I have neighbors. I have a life. And now you want to drag us into another showdown so that we beat or kill some unfortunate hubby who crossed your path. Not since. Since we ran into you, I had to shoot someone in a fit of anger. Her eyes narrowed, and she looked at him with a dangerous squint. Honey, could you go to the store for a cola? For a cola, Curtis grinned. I want to listen to his proposal. Will you promise not to shoot him while I'm gone? I promise not to shoot. Curtis cocked his head to the side. Do you promise not to kill him while I'm gone? I promise not to shoot, she repeated. Curtis laughed. It was an unpleasant laugh for Reg. Reg shook his head quickly. It's not about some husband. This is a girl. She got involved with bad company, dangerous company. These three brothers. They deal in illegal substances. Perhaps they produce it themselves. She ran off with one of them, and her friend isn't sure if she's okay. That's why she agreed to talk to me. They didn't know what these guys were doing until the girl fell in love with one of them. She may be held against her will. I don't know how to handle violence. I don't even have a weapon. You are the only ones I know who understand such matters. He looked at them hopefully. Andrea was silent, frowning, looking at her companion. He sat with an absolutely calm expression on his face. Reg saw how his interest gradually faded, passing on to her. And what will I get in return? Curtis said slowly, as if pondering the words. Now I'm quite satisfied. I have a place to live. There is money. There she is. You have nothing to offer me. I can help you find another job, Reg suggested. Oh, really? Curtis laughed. I doubt that your colleagues will be happy when people looking for me come to your work. Stepping aside is simply not an option for me. Leaving will not work for the us, Andrea corrected him. She hugged him by the shoulders and pressed her head against his shoulder. I hate your fucking job. Curtis shook his head, looking at Reg. Whatever you think of me and what I do, I won't kill anyone, let alone 3 people, just because they're dating a girl. That's what laws are for. She made her choice. Almost, Andrea pronounced this word clearly, still clinging to him. Curtis turned and looked at her, raising his eyebrows in silent question. She sighed and looked away, moving to the side and crouching down to watch their conversation. Reg looked at them. You can't take this calmly. You must help her. He turned to Andrea in despair. She looked at him with contempt. I can't. 2 minutes ago, I was ready to kill you so that you would not threaten our lives. Nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is the goal. Andrea sighed heavily, not taking her cold gaze off Reg. Now you want to drag us into something even more dangerous than beating up some pathetic husband. And if anything, well, an unfamiliar one is much more important to me. She grimaced with disgust. But saving a girl is a good thing, right? You are not helping, she snapped, her eyes quickly returning to Curtis. She crossed her arms over her chest, lowered her head, her hair fell forward, covering her face. Why are you even contacting us and not going to the police? Where are her parents? She asked, looking at the ground. I don't want to get the police involved unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't want to ruin her reputation. And in general, I would like to sort everything out myself. But you're not doing this yourself, but you want us to take it upon ourselves, responded Curtis, standing behind him. Reg was acutely aware of his vulnerability. Everything he knew about these two told him that the pressure on them was pure death. But he tried anyway. I'm not a doctor. If she got sick, I wouldn't try to treat her myself either. Reg looked straight at Andrea, who was squatting to his left. Her face remained stern and cold, but Kelly's story seemed to touch her somehow. He decided to press on it. Her name is Kelly Divekio. Andrea began to tremble. Suddenly his legs were grabbed from behind and sharply pushed up, forcing Reg to fall forward. With his hands tied behind his back, he was unable to break his fall, and his chest hit a rock protruding from the ground. He coughed, trying to catch his breath. Did they deliberately position it so that it would hit? However, it was a stupid question. Someone's hand pressed him by the ridges of his eyebrows. Sharp nails pressed against his closed eyelids, forcing them to press even tighter. Curtis leaned towards his ear and whispered in a quiet voice, cold as ice. It was truly masterful manipulation and an attempt to induce feelings of guilt. Fabulous. Now she will worry about this for several more days. And although in theory I approve of such techniques, in practice you are spitting on my fire. Then I have to live with her. She's not easy, even in normal condition, but now she's also hooked. Well, if we're playing manipulation, let me try mine. If you ever hurt her again, I'll send your head in a box straight to 1434 Cypress Boulevard in Boca Raton. I always did my homework. Reginald Perry. Reg felt his heart clench with fear. This was his father's address in a nursing home. He recently had a stent installed. I think, as a caring son, you will want to save him from emotional distress. Curtis thought for a moment, as if a new thought had come to his mind. He raised his head and, louder, asked, Baby, do you want to go to Florida? In response, Andrea said quietly, as if mournfully, Can I go to Disneyland? Dad never took me there. He said it was too plebeian a place. Of course, there are as many parks as you like. And your father was a complete idiot, he said with a softness that made Reg's skin crawl. Turning to him, Curtis spoke again with cold matter-of-factness. So do I need this box? He raised his eyebrows, waiting for Reg's answer. He shook his head weakly. After this short pause, Curtis asked, So, who is this girl you suddenly care so much about? She's my friend's daughter, Reg replied. Curtis chuckled. You swore to protect her and protect her from evil, and at the same time came to me for help. Don't you want to appeal to my sense of justice? He asked mockingly. Reg looked at him, trying to guess his reaction. No, that would be a waste of time. I'm counting on your boredom. You wouldn't listen to me at all if you weren't at least a little interested. Well, maybe this will make her, he nodded towards Andrea, a little happier. Curtis laughed loudly and Andrea looked up, grinning slightly. But he's right. So? She asked hopefully. Curtis smiled at her with slight sarcasm. Nice try, but you missed the whole point, honey, he said, pointing at Reggie. He promised to help her, protect her from evil. So, if anyone needs to be saved here at all, it's his promise, not mine. I don't interfere. It's his choice. Andrea sighed and squatted down with a slight frown. Curtis walked over to a large Whole Foods paper bag lying next to the car and picked it up. So speaking of choices, Reginald Perry, what do you want to be? A drunk or a victim of revenge? What? Reg was still thinking about the last moment when his attention sharply returned to the danger. About your death. You could be the drunk who fell off a cliff, or if you start making an issue out of it, the one who got caught by one of the husbands you pissed off, and then you'd be found shot dead. Judging by the look of shock on Reggie's face, Curtis tilted his head slightly to the side. Have you forgotten what the point is? I told you to leave us alone. He made it very clear what will happen if you continue to threaten us. He glanced at his wife. I even generously gave you a warning with your driver's license at her request. So, what will be your choice? Wait, who will help Kelly then? At least let me call her parents so they can do something. Reg began to beg. Curtis's expression made it clear that the likelihood of this was extremely low. Andrea, still frowning and looking at the ground, asked, Did you promise you would kill him if he kept pestering us? And then there's that private investigator he hired who might start asking questions. Slowly, Curtis's head turned towards her. One eyebrow rose. She continued to look down, not meeting his gaze. Tell me, Reginald Perry, did I promise I would kill you if you kept pestering us? He leaned down, looking straight into the face of the bound man. Reg looked into his eyes. Old, judgmental, and cynical eyes that seemed out of place on the face of a 30-year-old. Reg weighed his chances, thought about lying, but chose honesty. I don't remember. I was a little distracted at that moment. His mouth was as dry as he had ever felt in his life. This man, who seemed to attach great importance to promises, could not help but remember something as important as this. Very good. No, I didn't promise. I hinted at this very clearly. He turned back to his wife with an expression of bewilderment and disgust on his face. Seriously? He? She thought about it. No, leaving someone like him alive will make you nervous and irritable. Do what you have to do. Her face suddenly lit up. She jumped up and hugged him tightly. I'll put it this way. Let's finish here, kill him, dispose of the body, then we can go home. I'll give you a long hot bath. Then we'll get dressed, find you something to eat. Maybe a steakhouse, and then go dancing. And then I'll take you home and make love to you until you can't move. Curtis frowned and glanced at his watch. We have a date tomorrow. There's no need to be so strict with the schedule, she said lightly. His frown deepened. Let's just start a little earlier, and today everything will be just for you. She smiled at him lovingly. Why, if I may ask? Curtis asked suspiciously. I have some things coming up that will take a couple of days. 2 at most. Girl things. Her tone was light and innocent. I promise to make up for all this when I return. You won't have to interfere with all this at all. She affectionately buried her nose in his neck. Curtis stopped his foot, raised to strike the bent unfortunate. The pair looked at each other, exchanging silent thoughts. Finally, they both nodded. I'll bring you news, Reginald Perry. Reg cringed at the expression on Curtis's face. Today is your lucky day, the thug said through gritted teeth. Happy or not so happy? Because today is pretty shitty as it is, Reg asked cautiously. For me or for you? Well, Andrea put her hand on her husband's forearm. Our friend, followed by a low growl that she ignored, has come to us to vent to us about a personal family problem, for advice and an offer of generous work, which we, of course, cannot accept. All the promises or hints that were there before no longer matter because he did not pursue the yes. The couple stopped and looked at Reggie like a schoolboy at fault, waiting for his answer. No hunting. Reg paused and winced. I promise I don't feel any malice or animosity towards you too, especially considering how unequal the consequences of such animosity could be. Both continued to look at him. Even after today, he added, suppressing his anger and bitterness, he needed to get out of this terrible situation. It was, a misunderstanding. Most people would probably consider him a coward, but most of them were now sitting comfortably at home and not tied next to a cliff in the company of two armed psychopaths within arm's length. You see, I told you that he is a reasonable person. He is confident enough not to lose his temper over minor misunderstandings. Such people need to be supported. She easily jumped up to Reggie and kissed his forehead with cold lips. Reg wondered if she felt his goosebumps, caused not by the temperature of her skin, but by disgust and fear. A large hand grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. He felt his ankles being quickly untied. They brought him to his feet. It took a few seconds for him to be able to control his legs, as the relief from the stress made him breathe raggedly. The only thing worse than almost dying is dying completely, Reginald Perry. Curtis chuckled, helping him to his feet. The tone of the meeting changed so dramatically that it gave Reg the courage to ask a question that had been bothering him for a long time. Why did you suggest hitting me at the bar?" he asked. First of all, the punch would have been less painful and less fatal than what she would have done. Secondly, I've heard that the basis of effective communication is expressing your feelings, and I wanted you to understand exactly what I was experiencing. Third, I found your actions to be a rude and irritating display of unprofessionalism. What? Reg squealed. Curtis finally straightened him, moving him away from the edge of the cliff. I'm a bad person. And you? He furrowed his eyebrows and slightly tilted his head, looking intently at Reg, also a bad person. There was some uncertainty in his tone, and he studied it for a long time. What are you doing now, Reginald Perry? He shook his head slightly, returning to the point of the conversation. I recognize bad people at first sight. It's a kind of gift, and since you don't have this gift, I decided to demonstrate my intentions so that you would come to your senses and get out of there. But you turned out to be too stupid and arrogant to understand the hint. I get offended when bad people don't show me due respect. It never ends well, and it could still end badly. He finished ominously as he began to push Reg towards his car. I guess I should say I'm sorry, Reg suggested. For what? Curtis asked curiously. You've already paid. I shook you pretty hard. It's in the past. But this, he waved towards the cliff, happened because you decided to settle scores with us. Even so, I should have apologized for trying to woo her. I should apologize for the disrespect. Did you feel better after you said that? Yes, Reg nodded. Why? Curtis asked in surprise. I think we cleared everything up, Andrea said cheerfully. He's not going to come after us, and we're not going to Boca Raton. Reg winced. He didn't think she heard his whispered remark. Andrea stopped and gently grabbed his ears so that he could look her straight in the face. In case you change your mind, Boca Raton is right next door to Busch Gardens, she said clearly. It's on the other side of the state, Curtis corrected gently. Andrea smiled widely at Reggie, her teeth showing and her eyes sparkled. Reg, I love driving, she said dreamily. Reg trembled and wondered why he felt it was Curtis who scared him more. So, do you want to promise me to help her again? Reg suggested. No. What is a person if not a victim of his own choices? The moral burden is on you, Curtis declared. Andrea frowned, but didn't argue. Reg was abruptly turned to face his car and held while Andrea uncuffed him. He rubbed his hands together as she handed him back the car keys. Curtis very carefully placed the open handcuffs in his right back pocket. Can I borrow a gun? Asked Reg. His request was met only with laughter. No, I won't give you a gun, but I will give you the advice that you clearly need. Don't attack when all three of them are in the same place at the same time. This will improve your chances if you decide to rescue yourself, Curtis said. Reg, who had already gotten into the car, just looked at the psychopath in puzzlement. What? This is all? Is that all the advice you can give me? Any fool knows this. Oh, so have you thought about it yet? There was a tense pause until Reg's ears filled with red. Looks like you're not completely stupid. Curtis laughed again at Reg. Reg quickly left, trying to preserve the last vestiges of his dignity. Andrea, hugging Curtis, leaned her back against him, pressing her body to his chest. He wrapped his left arm around her waist, pulling her towards him. "Do you think he'll do anything?" she asked dreamily. "You can only hope, although, in my opinion, hope is a curse word like any other." He felt her frown as he sensed the change in her posture, which was an interesting sensation. Holding back a sigh so as not to betray his intentions, he put his right hand behind his back. Click! "Curtis! Curtis!" He took her cuffed right hand and moved it behind her back, while his left hand held her left hand, securing her other hand to the cuffs. Curtis spun her around, unbalanced her slightly, then crouched down, picking her up and throwing her over his shoulder, fireman style. "Curtis, put me down. This is completely indecent." She fidgeted in protest on his shoulder. "I know. This is an attack on your dignity, your freedom of choice, your personality, blah, blah, blah. And I know you don't think this idiot's chances are good. But I'm not going to let you go off on another crusade with dubious moral implications, where you could end up injured or worse. Not after I let that bastard get away. It was a condition." "Curtis." Her tone was warning. She changed tactics. "It's quite normal for each person in a relationship to have their own separate interests," she noted carefully. "Yes, and now I have a clear interest in bondage. Cosmo says couples should share their interests." Andrea knew she had made a mistake when she told him to read relationship guides. He stopped in his tracks. "That's it. I will let you go right here, and now if you promise me not to interfere in this mess and leave it alone." There was a short silence. "Okay." He headed back to the car. Andrea relaxed on his shoulder and gently stretched her arms. "These handcuffs are much more comfortable than the ones you usually use. Others sometimes rub. I especially like the lining. We need to take a couple more," she said matter-of-factly. "I'll add it to the list. You know, since I'm all tied up like this, do you want to throw me in the back seat and make out with me?" she suggested flirtatiously. Curtis slowed at the passenger door, feeling vaguely uneasy. He smiled and suddenly changed direction, leading her towards the hood of the car. He glanced at her hands. The right one was slightly relaxed, and the left one was clenched into a fist. Then, like a cobra, he sharply clenched her left fist and unclenched her fingers, tearing out the key to the handcuffs. She tried to straighten up, but her pants and Curtis's left hand held her in place. "You are impossible," she exclaimed with annoyance when he put the key in his pocket. "And you are manipulative." "Well, don't blame the girl for trying. So, what do you want?" She rocked her hips slightly, accepting defeat in their eternal love game. He couldn't resist. Reg ran into his apartment. "They found him, they found him, they found him. Months of nightmares have come true. They caught it as easily as they caught it from the ground. They had all the cards in their hands." He paced around his living room for several minutes, then rushed into the bedroom. He had just recently finished unpacking his things from his last move, a move that cost him thousands of dollars to disappear, to try to make himself unavailable. Money wasted. Having come to a decision, he opened the closet and pulled out the suitcases. It was too late to stay in this town. Florida, he could have gone to protect his father, or California, away from everyone. Maybe some place where there is no one, where he could be anonymous, like Nebraska. I wonder if this is even still a state. He began to take his favorite clothes out of the closet and put them in suitcases. Several little things that were dear to him also went there. Toiletries, my God, how many different colognes did he have? Gifts from former girlfriends. What a waste. He grabbed a couple of bottles that he had bought for himself. He definitely needs a place with relaxed gun laws. Why didn't he buy himself a gun sooner? He thought about meeting them in a firefight and shuddered. Although, even if he had a gun, they wouldn't give him a chance to use it. Maybe he should reconsider his attitude towards this. He rushed around the apartment, panickingly collecting things. Everything. 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 He went to the nightstand by the bed and automatically grabbed one of the photo frames. Making a mistake, he glanced at her. The photo was of his friend Phil's youngest daughter at her confirmation. Kelly was also in the photo, caught in a moment of cheerful laughter. Wes, Phil, and Hank stood around him, laughing and smiling. He stopped and punched the nightstand several times. No, they had a chance. He tried and tried to make amends. This is their problem. They themselves pushed him away, but they came to him for help. His mind tried to avoid this fact. Not wanting to discuss this with himself now, he put the frame face down and ran to the kitchen. He had some kitchen utensils left over from his father that he wanted to take with him. He glanced at the refrigerator. There was a photo of him with Jimmy and April at the Cozy Research Center. He knew Beth wouldn't allow him to have any contact with them, so he took the photo himself with his phone and printed it out. Next to it was a picture that April had drawn for him there. He stopped, staring at her. What if it was April? I remembered her smiling face when they were in Cozy. I remembered her face when her father didn't come home. Loud footsteps were heard outside, breaking him out of his reverie. Was it them? Have you changed your mind? Returning to finish him off, he became paranoid again. I heard laughter. It didn't mean anything. They could laugh at funerals too. But the steps quickly went up the stairs. He pressed his hand to his still aching chest and felt the sand from the quarry on him. Feeling dirty, he ran to the bathroom and pulled at the sides of his shirt, not caring that the buttons were spilling all over the floor. He will never wear that shirt again. Reg jumped into the shower and began to shiver, despite the hot water, his mind still racing. What difference would it make if it was April? April is not his daughter. He remembered how they walked through the space tunnel together, a long pipe that twisted and twisted around, causing dizziness. She was scared and disoriented. She clung to his fingers with her small fingers in search of support. Stop, stop, stop. You only need to think about yourself. He could have died here. To die at the hands of psychopaths or traffickers, or... His mind shied away from that thought again. Okay, he'll pack his things and leave. It doesn't matter where. The main thing is to stay away. Cars are sold everywhere. He needs a place where no one knows him, where no one would care who he was or what he did. He got out of the shower and began to dry himself with a towel, still looking around. Okay, I need to clean myself up and dress up a little. Sometimes he was able to convince hotel workers to upgrade his room. It was only when he brought the trembling razor to his face that he suddenly realized that he was stubbornly avoiding looking at himself in the mirror. He is a nonentity. He betrayed his friends. He betrayed the woman he loved. And he couldn't do anything about it. He looked himself straight in the eye. Someone will always know. Someone who cares. Shame. That's what's eating him. And he could not escape from himself, no matter how fast he ran. No matter how miserable his new home was. Alcohol, women, illegal substances. All this only covered up his problems, but did not solve them. He looked into his eyes. He already knew who he was. The question was what he wanted to become. His hand slowly passed over his cheek. In between, he debated whether to go to Mayer or Walmart to get what he needed. Reg knocked on the trailer door. It was so cliched that he himself was disgusted. The door was opened by a man with a wiry figure, the same lean, hard muscles one might find among Appalachians or traveling circus performers. It was the same man he had seen with Kelly several months ago. Memory for faces and names often helped Reg score points among his former girlfriends. Reg arrived an hour early and parked around the corner from the trailer park. A little reconnaissance revealed that the main bedroom was tightly closed with curtains and blinds. Through the top of the bathroom window, which was clear in contrast to the frosted glass below, he noticed several sets of underwear hanging on the drying rack above the bathtub. At the front of the gravel parking lot sat a yellow Camaro and a red Dodge Challenger. Through the window, he occasionally saw a male figure flashing in the trailer. He counted 3 men. Once he noticed the back of the blonde's head, walking from the kitchen towards the back. but he never saw the face. It was about 10:30 when the two men got out of the trailer, got into the Challenger, and drove off. Reg waited 10 minutes. It seemed like the right moment. He walked up and knocked on the door. "What do you want?" Rick barked, looking appraisingly at the car dealer. "I know it's late. It's just. I was visiting a girl here a couple of streets away." Reg gestured vaguely toward another part of the trailer park. "And as I was leaving, I noticed this gorgeous Camaro. What year is she?" "69, Rick answered with a hint of suspicion. "Wow, I'm into classic cars myself. I have a client who is a real Camaro fan. He is willing to pay good money for restored or restored models, so I decided to go up and find out about her." Rick's face showed pride and greed. "What amount are we talking about?" Reg has long appreciated this guy. There's no chance he'll sell his car. For him, she was just as integral to his identity. But he liked the idea of someone wanting to own the car, and he wanted the ego boost of being able to turn down a high-priced offer. It made him feel important. "It depends," Reg answered cautiously, playing the role of a seasoned negotiator. "I need to ask a couple of questions about her." "Which ones exactly?" Questions poured from Reg's lips. "Are you the owner?" "Yes." "Is this original chrome?" "Yes." "6 or V8? "V8. Rick looked offended that Reg would even ask that question. "Is Kelly in the back room?" "Yeah, what?" Rick didn't have time to finish when Reg struck him, squeezing him tightly. Kelly came running out of the back room, wearing a crop top and low-slung jeans with a thong showing underneath. She stared at him, her mouth open. "Reg, what are you doing?" Reg looked at her, then at Rick. "Go change into something your mother would see you wearing," he barked. "I'll take you home." He was struck by a feeling of indignation. If she were not his daughter, his friend, he would have been happy to see this on his mistresses. But on her, it only made him angry. "What? No. Did you hurt him?" She screamed, but Reg noticed that she did not rush to her boyfriend. Her shock and anxiety were clearly muted. There was shame in her gaze. "And relief? You spent 3 days here. You know who he is. I know who he is." Half a dozen arguments raced through his head. "Do you really think I'll take no for an answer?" He looked at her fiercely. Kelly looked at him for a few seconds. Several expressions changed on her face, but in the end her gaze settled on a feeling of guilt. What she was doing seemed like a fun game until someone she knew found out about it. Now she was forced to look at herself with different eyes. She turned around and ran into the bedroom. Reg looked around. The trailer was furnished in the style of modern American junk, with a large aquarium on the table next to the kitchen island taking pride of place. She returned just a couple of minutes later. While she was away, a loud thumping sound was heard from the bedroom. Kelly came out with a suitcase and pieces of a broken phone, which she threw into the water. "Do you need anything else?" He took my money. "And my phone," she said quietly. "Said we needed them for dinner and stuff. It was $400. "Where is the money?" Silence. Kelly put the kettle on the stove. Rick quickly assessed Reg's expression and didn't like what he saw at all. "In the kitchen, dude. In the freezer, wrapped in foil. Her phone is on top of the entertainment center." Kelly went to the freezer and began taking out foil packages, discovering mysterious frozen pieces and pieces of burnt meat among them until she came across her money. "Oh my God, there are thousands of dollars here, and you took my money? Do you have any idea how hard I worked to earn them?" She quickly took her phone back. "Take yours and go," Reg told her impatiently. It was at this point that varying socioeconomic expectations failed Reg. Kelly was so stunned by what had happened that she did not think that the two men who had left could return. Reg supposed the trailer already seemed small for 2 people. 4 people living here seemed unthinkable. So Reg was unpleasantly surprised when he heard the Challenger's engine roar again as it headed back to the trailer. Rick's 2 brothers returned with cigarettes. Reg saw them looking suspiciously at his blue Mustang and the slightly open trailer door. Rick started laughing behind him. Kelly, could you pass me the bat, please? Reg asked nervously and doomedly. Reg moaned in the car. You need to see a doctor, Kelly said with horror. No, we need to take you home first. I'll just drop you off at the house and you'll run inside. Mom and Dad will take care of you, she insisted. No, if they see me, they'll start asking questions. He looked at her with irritation. How could you be so stupid? You have parents, a nice home, people who love you, and you decide to give it all up for this bastard. The guy who steals your money and takes humiliating pictures with you. You have a mom. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, fighting back tears. Sorry, he seemed so good. Mom and Dad always give me rules. They drive me crazy. I'm already an adult. Old enough to have sex, but not smart enough to be careful. You understand? You were Kelly Divekio, a girl with a sweet smile and good parents. Now, if this gets out, you'll become a Kelly of easy virtue, the girl who was stupid enough to run away from her parents and get involved with trash. When you make such choices, it is very difficult to find your way back. Trust me, people will judge you, label you. These virtuous people will never let you forget it. His voice was full of bitterness. Now you will become Kelly the prostitute, Greg the bully, and I. He trailed off. Who are you? She asked, looking at him with wide eyes, her gaze full of anxiety. She didn't like the marks that were starting to appear on his face. It's none of your business, he answered sharply, barely containing the pain. He glanced at her, focusing again on the road. This is not about your father. We're not friends anymore. I understand that. It's about, look, I ruined my life. I know that. I'm down at the bottom, and I can't get out, and I won't let you make the same stupid mistakes I made. Not before my eyes, so that's what it was. You went to see Pauline and her friends, who were in college and heading to Cleveland. You were angry with your parents and decided to go on a trip with them to see the Rock and Roll Museum. If they ask what you saw there, say that you don't know who Jimi Hendrix is. They will be so stunned that they will immediately drop the topic. You went to several clubs and spent the night with a friend's friend. You don't remember her name. Make it so that they have to work hard to find out the truth. Talk to Pauline now so she can confirm this version. Later, maybe only in a private conversation, you will tell your mother the truth. Now hold on, continue your studies until you graduate from college. Yes, Reg, she said quietly. What about Rick? He's crap, liar. To hell with it. And if necessary, Reg could look at him again and talk. If he's meant to be a bad guy, why not be a bad guy for good? Maybe this time he'll bring a gun with him so he doesn't get hit in the head again. He was already pretty tired of these beatings. They drove up to her house. The yard was almost empty. Most likely, everyone had gone in search of their missing daughter. She ran out of the car and ran to the front door. Reg cursed quietly. Stupid girl. She could ruin the whole plan. Reg turned around and drove back. If he was out of sight, she might stick to her made-up story. She turned around and, to her horror, saw him, swaying slightly, driving away. When Reg arrived at his house, he had severe shooting pains in his head. The street lights felt like red-hot needles stabbing into his brain. He thought about putting on sunglasses, but changed his mind, remembering that this might arouse suspicion among the police. It's better not to attract attention. He parked at his apartment and, getting out of the car, stood up abruptly, which made him feel sick. He bent over and vomited right next to the car. Breathing carefully, he slowly walked towards his door, leaning on the wall for balance. He was grateful he lived on the ground floor, otherwise his brain would have seemed to leak out of his nose if he had to take the stairs. It was time to get ready in earnest. Psychopaths, no friends, no normal life. I had to leave. He stopped briefly and pressed his hand to his temple, hoping to ease the pain a little. Ooh, bad idea. Reg headed to the kitchen and grabbed a large trash bag. Then he returned to the bedroom and began to stuff his suits into it. The closet seemed strangely empty, as if his favorite clothes were disappearing right before his eyes. The bag quickly filled up. He went back to the kitchen for the next bag. The second bag also filled up very quickly. He had to go get a third bag, pause to take 5 ibuprofen in the bathroom, and then vomit again, which of course required him to take 5 more pills. It's time to leave. Leave it all to hell. He turned off the light in the bedroom, leaving only the dim light in the bathroom because the rest of the light seemed too bright to him. Carrying all the bags to the car was painfully difficult, and he realized that he could not survive 4 such trips. After spanking himself lightly, he realized that he could use the suitcase. After dumping the clothes out of it, he put all the bags inside. Less of a walker, he thought with a satisfied grin. Having filled the car, he drove out onto the road. You could ask Jim. No, not Jim. Not Phil. No one at all. Ask someone to mail his things. California sounded like the right place. For Reg jerked awake. You can't fall asleep. How can he get to California if he falls asleep? He could stay at a motel just outside of town. It's not far, but he needed to get to 100. They were lanterns, he thought when he woke up again. They made him close his eyes because they were too bright. They needed to reduce the voltage in these. Street lamps. Tree. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.